Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was heading home from the diner that night about 10 o'clock, driving my old Chevy down the winding county road that cuts past the radio tower. It had been a hot summer day, sticky, the kind where the air feels like it's pressing down on your skin. I rolled the windows down, hoping for any breeze, but there was nothing. The fields were dark, nothing but black shapes against the night sky, and the only sound was the hum of the engine. I usually don't pay much attention to that tower. It's been there for decades, a stubby steel thing with a blinking red light at the top. But as I rounded the last bend before it, something about the field at its base made me slow down. There was this ring in the crops, wheat or maybe barley, flattened in a perfect circle. Not jagged, not random, just a clean, smooth circle, glowing slightly in the way moonlight hits wet pavement. I blinked. That wasn't there yesterday. I parked the truck on the shoulder, getting out to look. My boots sank slightly into the soft dirt, and the smell of summer grass and damp earth hit me. I squinted across the field. It looked ordinary, and not ordinary at the same time. The circle was maybe 20 feet across, and the stalks bent over in one direction, forming that perfect outline. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, thinking maybe it was a text from my sister. The screen was weird, all fuzzy, lines of static running across it, and the signal bar was jumping from 0 to 3 and back again. I shook it, tried turning it off, but it just went wild, lights flickering. Then it started talking. Not music, not a ringtone, but voices. Low, distorted, overlapping. I couldn't make out words. One part sounded like a whisper, another like a growl, and somewhere beneath that, a strange rhythm, almost like chanting. I stumbled back toward the truck, holding the phone in front of me. The engine of the truck coughed, then died. I hit the key again. Nothing. The field was silent except for the whispering static on my phone. I looked at the tower. Nothing moved there, the red light blinking steadily, and yet the air felt different, heavier somehow, like standing underwater. I tried my car radio. Nothing but static, hissing and murmuring like my phone. Even my old handheld scanner, which usually just picks up CB and police chatter, and it started crackling with voices that weren't there a second ago. The voices weren't loud, just there, hovering under everything else. My stomach twisted. I thought about calling the sheriff, but my phone was useless. I walked closer to the circle, trying to make sense of it. Every step made the static louder, like it was aware I was moving toward it. I glanced at the stalks in the circle. They weren't moving like someone had stomped on them. They were bent perfectly, no broken stems, no footprints leading in or out. I circled it slowly, careful not to touch anything. The voices in the electronics got louder, almost pressing against my eardrums, but still unintelligible. Then it stopped. Just like that. My phone went dead, my radio went quiet, and even the scanner sounded normal. The air felt lighter, like someone had pulled a weight off my chest. I stood there for a minute, breathing hard, staring at the circle, trying to figure out what had just happened. I didn't hear anything else that night, and I drove home the long way, windows down, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. I told myself it was interference, maybe some kind of glitch in the tower, static bouncing in the air, but something in me didn't believe it. The next morning, I went back. The circle was still there, and now I could see how perfect it was. I brought a tape measure, 20 feet across, exact. The stalks bent uniformly, nothing broken. I walked around it, checking for footprints or tire tracks. None. Even the soil was undisturbed. I asked a neighbor, Clint, if he'd heard anything strange. He shrugged. Nothing but the usual wind, he said. But he lives a few hundred yards away and his house is shielded by trees. I knew what I'd heard. Over the next few days, reports started coming in from the area. People near the tower said their radios had gone nuts around the same time I had been there. Phones acting up, static voices, a few complaints about brief ringing in ears. Nothing permanent, nothing people could trace to equipment failure. Just odd. I went back a couple of times trying to catch it again, set up a small recorder in the field at night. I didn't hear anything, but I could feel it. The air thickening, a subtle vibration under my feet. The circle seemed to hum faintly, almost imperceptibly, like the earth itself was holding its breath. One night, about a week later, I drove past again. The circle hadn't changed, but this time I saw something at the edge of my vision. A flicker of movement, maybe a shadow, something tall and thin slipping between the stalks. I slowed down, but when I looked straight at it, nothing was there. The hairs on my neck stood up, and I didn't stop the truck. I've driven past that field 100 times since, always watching, always half expecting to see that shadow again. The circle is still there, perfectly round, stubborn in the same spot. No footprints, no tire tracks, no signs that anyone or anything has been there. The tower still blinks its red light every night, silent and ordinary. And sometimes when my phone is off or the radio is quiet, I swear I hear it. A low, indistinct whispering, just at the edge of hearing, like it's waiting for someone to get too close. I don't go there at night anymore. Not since that first time. Not since I realized how quiet the world is when you're standing in one of those circles, and how loud the world gets when you're outside it trying to explain what you heard to anyone else. I was walking home with my friends Marcus and Lila down the dirt road that runs along the east side of Eagle Ridge, just on the outskirts of town. It was mid-June, the kind of evening where the air hangs heavy after the heat of the day, and the mountains in the distance look dark blue, almost like shadows stretching across the horizon. We were joking around about nothing in particular when Lila pointed up. "There," she said, voice low. I followed her finger. At first, I thought it was a plane, maybe a small prop plane on a training run. But then it moved. Fast. Too fast, and not like a plane. It zipped up and down between the ridges, darting behind peaks, then suddenly up into the sky in a straight line, disappearing in a blink. "Holy, did you see that?" Marcus whispered. We stood there, silent, watching. The sky was still bright enough that we could make out the outline of the peaks, the trees, the way the road curled around the base of the mountains. But the object didn't come back. Nothing made a sound, not a motor, not a jet engine, just gone. We walked the rest of the way home in this weird quiet, everyone trying to act normal but clearly still shaken. I kept thinking I'd misjudged it somehow, that it was just some plane or a drone, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The next day at school, things got stranger. I noticed right away when I got to the guidance counselor's office. There were two men in black suits sitting there, both older, bald, or with hair so slicked back it looked like it might be fake. They didn't look like any staff I'd ever seen before. The counselor, Mrs. Halbrook, was nowhere to be seen. They called students in one by one. I sat outside the office with the other kids, trying not to stare. Every so often, one of the kids would come out, eyes wide, face pale, muttering something that didn't make any sense, like, "Yeah, just answer questions, okay." They didn't look upset, but there was this tense, frozen energy around them. When it was my turn, one of the men gestured for me to sit. "Have you noticed anything unusual recently?" he asked, voice calm, precise, like he was reading from a script. What do you mean?" I asked. "Any disturbances?" "In the sky? Sounds, lights, movements that don't match conventional aircraft," he said. I swallowed. My mind raced. Did he mean last night or the night before? I tried to sound casual. Yeah, maybe. I saw something over the mountains yesterday," I admitted. The other man scribbled something into a notepad, just a few words, then looked up at me. "Describe it," he said. I told him what I'd seen. Fast, darting, no sound, disappearing into the sky. I kept my voice steady, though my hands were a little sweaty. "And anyone else with you?" the first man asked. Yeah, 2 friends," I said. They wrote a few more things down. Then the first man leaned back in his chair. "Nothing else?" "No," I said. "That's it." I left the office feeling weirdly off. It wasn't fear exactly, more like this heavy prickling awareness that something was watching, just beneath the surface of normal life. The next few days were strange. People acted normal around me, but I kept catching glimpses, sometimes in the hallways, sometimes outside school, of dark-suited men standing at the edges of parking lots, near the bus stop, or just lingering by the trees behind the football field. Every time I looked, they'd vanish. Then there was the humming. It started late at night. I was in my bedroom, reading, when I noticed this low, pulsating sound. Not loud, but constant. I thought maybe it was the heater or some transformer, but it had this vibration that seemed to shake the windows lightly. Lila said she heard the same thing when she called me the next morning. Marcus hadn't noticed it. I tried recording it on my phone. The audio sounded weird, almost like a constant low thrum, then a sort of flicker, like the sound skipped for a fraction of a second every few seconds. Playing it back made my chest feel tight. A few nights later, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My parents were asleep, and I hadn't told anyone about the humming. I opened it. Two men, black suits, standing there, bald, black sunglasses, though it was dark. "Evening," one said, voice calm, neutral. I froze. "Have you had any audio disturbances lately?" the other asked. I blinked. "Yeah, I guess. How do you know?" They didn't answer, just stepped a little closer. Not threatening, but there was this pressure, like the room itself was too small for them. "I need you to tell us everything about it," the first man said. "Times, duration, other witnesses." I stumbled through it, telling them about the nights I'd recorded the hum, about Lila hearing it too, about the fast light in the mountains. They listened silently, occasionally jotting notes. After I finished, they gave me a look that was neither satisfied nor disappointed, just neutral. "Keep this to yourself," the first man said, "and don't discuss it with anyone else." Then they left, just like that. The door clicked shut behind them. I stood there for a long time, staring at the blank hallway. The humming didn't stop, though it got weaker after that night. A week later, it vanished completely. I checked the recording again. Playing it back, I realized something. For the last few seconds of every clip, the sound was gone. Then the audio warped slightly, like something invisible had brushed past the microphone. I saw the men one more time, a couple of weeks later at the grocery store. They were in black, sunglasses on, standing by the vegetable section like they belonged there, watching. When I looked away and back, they were gone. School went back to normal, friends went back to joking about nothing, but I noticed the mountains more often. Sometimes at dusk, I'd catch a flicker of something darting between the ridges, too fast for a plane, too precise to be birds. I didn't say anything to anyone, I just watched. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I think about those knocks, the questions, the notes they took. I wonder if they ever came for Lila or Marcus, or if they only needed me. I've never heard from them again. But every now and then, when the air is still and the mountains are dark against the sky, I swear I hear it. The low hum, faint, pulsating like the world is holding its breath. And I know I'll hear it again, even if no one else ever does. We pulled off the highway at the little tourist stop because my wife wanted a close-up of the giant jackrabbit statue. You know the kind. Plaster ears up, eyes gone soft from being painted too many times. It was one of those places on the map between Albuquerque and Gallup that promised coffee and a salt lick for the radiator. Our kids, Maggie was 9 and Billy 6, had been cooped in the Studebaker since dawn and were eager to run around. My sister Ida had come along. She likes road trips the way some women like bridge clubs. It looked ordinary enough when we stopped. A gravel lot, a wooden diner with a swinging door, an ice machine humming out back, a string of faded pennants over the entrance. The sign said, "Rabbit's Rest, photo a mile." There were a couple of other cars, an old pickup and a family with their own camera, and a man at the counter who sold postcards and peanuts. We took the picture on the south side of the statue because the light was right. Late afternoon sun coming off the sage. I put the camera on the little tripod, wound the shutter carefully like my father showed me when I was a boy, and set it for a wide shot. I remember telling Billy to stand next to the rabbit while I cleared my throat and waved at Ida to get Maggie to stop fidgeting. I can still see the way the kids were standing. Maggie with her hand on the rabbit's knee, Billy half turned like he wanted to race. Ida had her hand on my shoulder, smiling the way she always does when there's fresh air. I snapped 2 frames so I'd have one for the album. There was nothing then that made me think of anything odd. The bell over the diner door jingled. Someone laughed on the porch. The river of cars on the highway droned by like usual. The man selling postcards called out the price of a Coke, and a dog that I'd thought was tied up ran after a boy and then came back, tail wagging. After we stretched our legs and bought Cokes, we asked the man behind the counter where to get the film developed. He pointed to the Rexall in town. They said it would take overnight and cost a little more if you wanted your negatives. We left the prints at the desk and drove on, Route 66, to wherever the road pushed us that day. I thought no more about the picture until the next afternoon when the Rexall clerk handed me the envelope. The first several shots were what you'd expect, the rabbit looming over us, the diner behind, Maggie's hair in the light, Billy's grin. Then the third print, I knew it by the way Maggie was squinting into the sun, had something else in it. Something like a bright coin in the sky, but not a coin. Smooth, too smooth. Oval, maybe, with a sheen like polished tin. It was just above the ridge of the hills behind the tourist stop, and if you squinted, it had a faint, darker band along one edge. The thing was small and distant in the frame, but it was clearly there, right where the sky is plain blue. I ran my finger over the edge of the print the way you do when you're trying to make the light line up. "Did you see this?" I asked Ida at the counter, and she took the picture and blinked and handed it back. "Did you?" She started, then shook her head. "No," she said, and her voice had that little catch little Kai get when she's thinking hard. "I don't remember anything." That was the strangest part. We all knew the routine of a tourist photo. Your eye remembers children squinting, the way a hand fell on a knee, whether someone was looking at the camera or not. None of us remembered a thing in the sky. Maggie and Billy kept saying the bunny smelled like old paint, and Ida said the coffee was the best she'd had on the trip. No one mentioned an oval bright thing. I showed the photograph to the clerk and his face went a little flat. "Looks like a light," he said. "Could be a plane, maybe the sun caught a strut, or those chemtrails get funny with the light." He looked equally unsure. He offered to show me the negative. When he held it up to the lamp, the silver shape was there too, crisp as the rabbit's ear. When we drove back that week, the place was different. The rabbit was still the rabbit. The diner still had the same screen door, but folks were looking at the sky. A man at the counter when we stopped, different from the one who'd sold postcards, said he'd had 2 calls from other towns asking if anyone had seen odd lights the evening before. He swore he hadn't, then added quietly that a neighbor of his swore her cattle wouldn't move for 2 hours. The cowboy at the gas pump said his radio had given a hiss just before he went inside for a sandwich, but that wasn't uncommon, he hedged. There was always a story if you leaned close enough to a stranger. I kept looking at that print even after we put the rest in the album. The shape was small in the frame, but it had that impossible sheen, like someone had polished a coin number flat and left it too bright. When I held the negative to the light, I could see a fine grain above the object, like the sky had been disturbed in a neat little ripple. After a week, I'd become the man with the picture. At church, members asked and nodded. Ida's friends at the beauty shop had their own theories. One said it must be some military experiment. Another said it was likely only a trick of the developer. I started to doubt myself the way you doubt pennies dropped in a dark pocket. Maybe I'd looked up and then looked down. Maybe my eye made a thing from lens flare. It didn't help that the Rexall man told me the machine was checked and the chemicals were fresh. He did not offer any opinion. I kept going back to the tourist stop. I wanted to ask people to listen for the sound of planes at odd hours, or for someone to say, "Oh yes, now you mention it, I remember." The place seemed more ordinary each time. The dog was tied up now and didn't move. A kid chased a spool across the lot. A woman in an apron scrubbed the counter of the diner. A man in a suit looked up from the paper and watched us as if he had been watching a whole day of people go by. He did not answer when I asked about lights. At home, I framed the print and put it on the mantle between the clock and the school photograph of my children. Sometimes in the evenings, I'd catch myself standing in the hall and studying the sky in that little square of paper, as though the oval might shift or say something. Maggie would ask why I kept looking at it. I told her I liked the way the sun had come off her hair. She seemed satisfied and bounded off to her room. There were other little things after that. Once I was filling the truck with gas, and the man at the pump turned his head and said, "You ever get the feeling someone's looking?" He meant anyone, he explained. the way you do when a dog gives you the once-over. An old woman at Mrs. Dalton's grocery said she'd seen something like a kite that evening, but with no thread. A boy at school said his father's compass had spun a little while they were fixing fence posts. Each time I heard a thing, it sat with me like a small stone in my shoe, annoying, making me aware of the step I took. The print sat on my mantle for months. Once, after a storm, I found myself setting it face to the window as though the thing might slip out of the paper and into the sky. Nothing happened. The children grew and broke toys, and the photograph yellowed a touch at the edges. The oval in the sky stayed where it had been, still and small, a light with no sound. I went back to the tourist stop one last time before the leaves turned. The rabbit had been repainted. Someone had hung bunting that looked new. The man in the diner told me he'd been there when a couple from Amarillo came in with a stack of photographs showing the same bright spot. He had no more answers than I did. Maybe the world's keeping a secret, he said, and offered me a stale donut. I don't claim to know what it was. I know how it felt, like being present at the edge of something you can't reach. The photograph hangs in our house still, more out of habit than curiosity. Guests glance at it when they're asked to sign the guest book and make a small remark about the light. Sometimes, late at night, I wake and picture the sky behind the rabbit, empty, but for a bright coin sliding across it. I think of small things, a clerk's lamp in a drugstore, a negative held up to a bulb, the way a family lines itself for a picture. I do not, any longer, trust my memory to hold everything it sees. The camera kept a thing for me that my eyes had missed, and for reasons I cannot give a name to, I kept looking at that small bright mark as if it might give one back. I first saw him when I was coming back from the diner, walking down Main Street toward my apartment. It was late, probably close to midnight. The town was mostly dark. A few lights flickered in the windows of the general store and the cafe. I remember seeing him standing under the street lamp near the post office, just watching the street like he belonged there. That part alone didn't seem so strange at first. Drifters did pass through town, but something about the way he was dressed caught my eye. His suit looked old, maybe from the 30s, pressed and spotless like it had never been worn. The shoes didn't have a mark on them, and the coat was buttoned perfectly. In a town where most folks had dust on their boots and frayed collars, he stuck out. He noticed me before I got close. He gave me a little nod, polite but deliberate. I hesitated for a moment because something about him felt off. He wasn't like the other drifters I'd seen. He didn't look tired, didn't fumble for coins or wander aimlessly. His eyes were calm but alert, like he was reading the street in a way no stranger should. "Evening," he said. His voice was quiet but clear. "Could you tell me where I might find Willow Street?" I frowned. Willow Street didn't exist, at least not in our town. I've lived here most of my life, and there's no Willow Street, just maple, pine, and oak. There isn't a Willow Street here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, just slightly, not in a mocking way, but as if he'd expected that answer. "I could have sworn it was here, right past the intersection near the bakery." I shook my head. "No, sir, there's nothing like that. The bakery's still there, though. You can't miss it on Oak." He nodded slowly, looking down the street the way I was supposed to. Then he cocked his head as if considering something else. "And what of Mr. Coleridge? I was told he lives near the corner of Chestnut and Vine." My stomach twisted. Mr. Coleridge lived 2 streets over. Yes, but no one had mentioned him to a stranger, and I hadn't even met the guy yet. The drifter shouldn't have known his name. I opened my mouth to say something, but he interrupted. "Or perhaps I misremember. I've been on the road for so long it all blurs." I wanted to step back. The street was quiet, except for the occasional hum of a far-off truck. I noticed that though he looked ordinary enough, there was something about his movements that was just not quite right. He didn't shift his weight the way a person does, like you expect someone to breathe in rhythm with the world around them. He was precise. He turned his head smoothly, scanned the buildings, the windows, the empty street, without a hint of the hesitation I associate with someone unfamiliar with a place. "Maybe I've taken a wrong turn," he said finally. "Could you point me to the center of town?" I. I hesitated again, feeling like a child caught off guard. "You're 2 streets over," he said. "Yes, but no one had mentioned him to a stranger." I opened my mouth to say something, but he interrupted. "Or perhaps I misremember. I've been on the road for so long it all blurs." I wanted to step back. The street was quiet, except for the occasional hum of a far-off truck. I noticed that though he looked ordinary enough, there was something about his movements that was just not quite right. He didn't shift his weight the way a person does, like you expect someone to breathe in rhythm with the world around them. He was precise. He turned his head smoothly, scanned the buildings, the windows, the empty street, without a hint of the hesitation I associate with someone unfamiliar with a place. Maybe I've taken a wrong turn, he said finally. "Could you point me to the center of town?" I hesitated again, feeling like a child caught off guard. "You're already on Main," I said. "The center's right down that way." I pointed vaguely toward the diner and the clock tower. He nodded, and for a moment I thought he might leave, but instead he paused, looking down Main like he was trying to remember something. Then he smiled faintly, almost wistfully. "I suppose it doesn't matter. The directions I'm given rarely match the streets I walk." That sentence stuck with me. It wasn't odd in a casual way. It was wrong. People didn't talk like that. It was formal, deliberate, like a line rehearsed too many times. I decided to leave him alone, took a few steps back toward my apartment, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. When I glanced over my shoulder, he was still standing there under the lamp, not moving, just looking. Then, he did something stranger. He lifted one hand and waved slightly, not at me, not a casual wave, just a small, deliberate movement, like he was acknowledging something only he could see. Over the next few days, I kept running into him in the oddest places: the grocery store, the town library, the old church at the edge of town. Each time, he asked questions that didn't make sense. "Is the Smithson place still there? The one with the white picket fence?" No one in town had called it that in years. "I was told the train passes here. It should have come through an hour ago." But the train schedule didn't mention anything for another 3 days. I started keeping notes because I couldn't understand what I was seeing. He never interacted with anyone except to ask these odd questions. People would glance at him and look away quickly, but he never seemed to notice. And sometimes when I looked at him, I had this weird impression, like his eyes were tracking something behind me, just out of reach. One night, I saw him near the edge of town, past the fields where the corn was starting to grow. It was foggy, the kind of fog that clings low to the ground, muffles sound. He was standing near the railroad tracks, staring into the mist. I walked over, curiosity getting the better of me. "You shouldn't be here," I said softly. He turned to me, smiled faintly. And yet, here I am. His eyes didn't follow me the way normal eyes do. They seemed fixed on a point beyond the fog. "I've been told to wait for the evening light, but it comes slowly here." I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words wouldn't come. The fog rolled thicker between us, and I noticed something else. The town behind us was completely silent. No dogs barking, no crickets, not even the faint rumble of the train in the distance. Just nothing. Then he started walking along the tracks, slowly, deliberately. I followed at a distance, trying to keep the road between us and whatever I thought might be behind him. After a few minutes, he stopped, turned, and looked at me. The path doesn't always appear as you remember. That line made my stomach tighten. I wanted to ask again, what path? But something in his expression made me hold my tongue. He didn't wait for me to answer. He turned and vanished into the fog, the way someone disappears down a street, except there were no footprints, nothing to show he had been there. I spent the rest of that night walking back to my apartment, my mind spinning. By morning, there was no sign he had been in town at all. No footprints, no marks in the dirt, not even the faint scent of his coat. I asked a few people if they had seen anyone matching his description, but no one had. The odd part is, I still caught glimpses of him now and then. A corner of the library shelf, a shadow under the street lamp, a shape moving past the bakery window. Always gone when I looked directly. Eventually, I stopped trying to follow him. I couldn't tell whether he was real or if he was some trick of the fog and the quiet streets. But sometimes, late at night, I walk past Main Street and swear I see that old suit, spotless and pressed, waiting under the lamp, and I feel the same unease, like the town itself is holding its breath. I never saw him talk to anyone else. I never heard his voice, except when it carried directly to me. And sometimes when I think of that night on the tracks, I get the sense he wasn't even waiting for me. Not really. He was waiting for something else, something I couldn't see, something that wasn't supposed to be here. I don't know who he was. I don't know why he knew names he shouldn't have, why he asked for streets that didn't exist, why he disappeared into fog as if the world had swallowed him. But he was here, and the memory of him stays with me like a shadow at the edge of the street lamp, always just out of reach. I never spoke about it to anyone else. Not in town, not to my family. People would have called me crazy. But I still see him sometimes when the fog rolls in and the street is empty. And I keep thinking, maybe he isn't a man at all. Maybe he's just something else, walking slowly along the paths we think we know. I had pulled over because I needed to stop staring at the road. It was one of those late drives after a double shift, my head hollowed out from fluorescent lights and the radio, and the stretch of Old Mill Road where I stopped was the kind of place that felt like into a different hour of the night. No houses, a ditch on either side, a single orange street lamp every half mile that left the space between them a soft black. I killed the engine, left the dash clock glowing, and leaned back with my hands on the steering wheel, trying to let my eyes refocus. It was humid. The air smelled like cut grass and exhaust. Crickets were steady, not loud but constant. A couple of minutes in, I noticed a blink far off, a dim headlight rolling toward the intersection 2 miles down, the kind of approaching car you expect to pass and leave you alone again. I watched it get to the lamppost near the mill, and then it was like someone flipped it off. The light was gone a full second before it should have been, like it vanished between poles. The silence took on a different edge after that, the crickets folding a hair quieter. I told myself I was being jumpy and reached over the stereo to turn the radio back up. Static, hissing under nothing. The display read 12:07. I remember checking the time because I wanted to know how long I'd been sitting there, and because time matters when you're trying to convince yourself you're not totally wrecked. The analog of the place lines up in my memory. The lampposts, the warm air, the smell of the car's leather. That's when the rearview mirror filled with light. Not a headlight, not a beam sweeping in from the road. The whole surface of the mirror just flashed white, like someone had put a tiny sun where my rearview normally was. It wasn't a sharp flash, not like a camera. It was a flat, clean white that took up the whole rectangle and stayed there for an odd, soft second, bright enough to repaint the interior in pale color. The glove compartment, the curve of my steering wheel, the tiny scratches near the gear shifter, everything went white in the mirror. And yet when I looked up through the back window, there was nothing. Just the black road, the ditch, a patch of cattails, no vehicle lights, no people, no faint shape that could explain where that mirror light had come from. I turned in my seat, slow and stupid like I was trying to be careful. The angle is enough to show you the road behind the car and a little of the embankment. There was absolutely nothing there. No headlights, no flash, nothing that would have caused reflective glare. The street lamp behind me threw a narrow cone of orange across the pavement, but beyond that there was the same black ribbon of road stretching off into nothing. When I turned back, the mirror was normal, just a dark little rectangle showing a slice of empty road. The dash clock read 12:21. I remember this part exactly because my brain did a stupid little loop trying to reconcile it. 12:07 to 12:21. 14 minutes gone in the space of a breath. I sat with my hand frozen over the stereo knob and stared at the numbers like they might fess up if I looked long enough. I checked my phone. It was one of those automatic lock screen times, the quick glance you give without thinking. 12:07. The same time pattern as before. My watch, 12:08, which meant I hadn't even closed my eyes for a full minute. The dash clock alone had leapt forward, and it was the only thing that had done it. I got out of the car. It was ridiculous. The night bit at the back of my throat when I stepped onto the shoulder. The gravel under my shoes was cold. I walked to the trunk and opened it just to make sure everything was where I'd left it. The gym bag, the jumper, and they were. No sign of being moved, no mud, no prints leading away except mine. Standing there, the stretch of road looked normal in that boring, official way. Streetlights hummed. The ditch swallowed the night. Nothing glowed or pulsed. Nothing that would explain the mirror acting like a window into something else. My heart was doing that flinty, clumsy thing where you feel like you might need sugar or water or an ambulance. I went back to the driver's seat and turned the engine over, trying to push the moment away by doing something ordinary. The car cough started on the third turn. Nothing dramatic, just that mechanical reluctance old cars have when the battery's lazy. I took a breath and drove off, keeping to the center of the lane like I was the only vehicle on Earth. I pulled onto the main road without breaking pace. For the next 10 minutes, I kept glancing in the rear view, half expecting the white patch to hospital lamp me again. The mirror showed the familiar, boring sweep of the road receding, a tiny patch of street lamp orange shrinking into the dark. The dashboard clock ticked forward normally after that, not skittering in time jumps anymore. My phone held steady on its timestamp. The radio, which I'd set back to something boring, came in clear. It felt like I had snapped some string and everything had put itself back into place, except that there was 14 minutes that were not in any of the devices I rely on except the car. When I got home, I checked everything twice. The thermostat was untouched. The front porch light came on when I pushed the switch with the same throb it always makes. My wife was up folding laundry in the living room and asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes and lied that I'd taken a longer smoke break out by the car. I fired off a text to a friend, a dumb line about being a tired wreck, because you look for small, tidy confirmations when the world seems off. The timestamp on the text matched my phone and my watch, 12:08. My watch was an old analog, and sometimes it hangs a beat when I forget to wind it, but it matched the phone and not the dash. There was no explanation. Later, I called the dealership just to ask if the dash could misbehave like that. Could it jump? The kid on the other end said probably a loose connection, maybe a software hiccup, if the car had been hit by a spike. He asked if I'd had any electrical storms. I told him no. He asked if anything else had happened. I hadn't wanted to mention the light because I'd already thought about how insane it sounded. But when he said spike, I thought about the mirror being a white square and the way the radio had hissed in the passing car that looked like it blinked out. Just get it checked, he said. Bring it in tomorrow. I slept badly. When I woke, the little sandpit of my memory for those 14 minutes had the same stale smell as old coffee. It's not that I was trying to prove something to anyone, I was trying to prove it to myself. You tell a story in pieces, and sometimes the pieces refuse to stitch back together. I drove the car to the dealer the next morning. They hooked it up to a scanner, fiddled with the clock, shrugged at a possible loose wire. They tested the alternator. They ran diagnostics on the display. Nothing came back except a tiny log entry for a time sync error, which their tech couldn't explain either. He looked at me and said the one thing I hadn't wanted to hear because it meant nothing. Mechanical would fix the feeling. Electrical gremlins aren't usually anything more than bad wiring. So I'm writing this because I don't have an answer. 14 minutes showed up on the dash like someone pressed fast forward on a movie and left the film reel broken. The mirror showed a white square that filled it and then went away like a shutter closing. The only concrete is that I'm home and the world kept going. The rest sits in the place where small, unaccountable things live, under the ordinary layer of things that make sense. I started keeping my phone face up on the passenger seat after that, the way you watch a clock when you're trying to use time as an anchor. It hasn't happened again, which is maybe worse. I end up looking at the rear view sometimes when I'm stopped at traffic lights, waiting for the impossible to reappear so I can get credit for seeing it. It doesn't, and the numbers on the dash stay stubbornly normal. I was still awake around 12:45 a.m., just scrolling on my phone in bed. The house was quiet except for the faint buzz from the fridge in the kitchen, when I realized there was another sound under everything else. It was low, so low it almost didn't register as sound at first, more like a vibration in my chest. I set my phone down and listened. It wasn't coming from inside the house. The fridge kicked off and it was clearer, a deep, steady hum somewhere outside. I went to the front window and peeked through the blinds. The street was empty, no headlights, no people walking dogs. Still, the hum was there, hanging in the air. I unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool and still, with that faint smell of damp asphalt. The humming got stronger the second I was outside, not deafening, but thick, like it had weight to it. That's when I saw the lights. They were above the houses across the street, maybe 200 or 300 feet up. A tight cluster of white or pale blue points, about the size of bright stars, but they didn't twinkle or blink. There had to be a dozen, maybe more, and they moved together in a way I've never seen before. Not in a straight line, not circling, more like a school of fish shifting direction all at once. They'd dart one way, then freeze, then slide sideways, then tilt in a completely different direction without slowing down in between. No arcs, no curves, just instant changes. And the hum seemed to change with them, lower when they spread out, higher when they bunched up. I walked halfway down my driveway without thinking, eyes locked on them. The lights weren't huge, but the way they moved made them feel close, almost too close. Every time they shifted, it made my stomach flip, like watching something that didn't care about the rules I expected it to follow. There was no rotor noise, no jet sound. The whole neighborhood was silent except for that hum. Even the usual highway noise from a couple miles off wasn't there. The formation started drifting toward me, though drifting isn't quite right. It was like they were gliding on rails I couldn't see. They slowed just above the nearest row of houses. From where I was standing, I could tell they weren't attached to anything solid. There was just open air between them. For maybe 30 seconds, they stayed in place, shifting and reforming silently. I thought about grabbing my phone from inside, but the idea of looking away felt wrong. Like if I did, they might be gone before I came back. Then they started to climb, all together, as if pulled upward. The hum rose with them, not in volume but in pitch, until it was almost like a pressure in my ears. They entered a low bank of clouds hanging above the streetlights and were swallowed instantly. The second the last light disappeared, the humming stopped. It wasn't a slow fade, it just cut off like someone hit a switch. And the silence that followed felt different. Not just quiet, but empty. I stood in the driveway staring at the cloud cover for a long time. Nothing came back out. No lights, no sound, no movement. Then I realized I was holding my breath. When I went back inside, my clock said 1:08. I couldn't have been outside for more than a few minutes, but my hands were cold like I'd been standing out there for much longer. I checked the local news and weather the next day. No reports of aircraft, no scheduled low flights, nothing about strange lights. But the way they moved, I still can't place it. Planes don't move like that. Neither do drones. And I haven't heard that hum again. But sometimes late at night when it's dead quiet, I catch myself turning off whatever I'm watching just to listen. I was on my little boat, a 24-foot center console named the Minnow, somewhere off the northern coast of Maine. I usually didn't head out past 10 o'clock, but that night I had some fish to clean up from earlier trips, and the moon was almost full, so I figured the light would be enough. The water was calm, the sort that felt almost syrupy in the dead of night, and there was a sharp cold in the air, the kind that sinks into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. I'd just gotten the lines in and was rinsing the deck when it happened. At first, I thought it was a lighthouse or another boat, but nothing on the radar. Then a beam of white light, really bright, cut across the water. It came from above the clouds, like a searchlight, but wrong. Too steady, too precise. Not swinging, not blinking, just sliding across the waves as if someone were sweeping them with a ruler. I froze. The beam was cold. I mean, the air around it almost seemed to suck the warmth out of me. My teeth were chattering, and my hands went numb even though I was wearing gloves. The water underneath the light looked like it had been bleached. It wasn't reflecting like moonlight. It was like the water itself had lost color. I tried to get the engine going to move away, but my fingers were slow, fumbling over the controls. Every instinct told me to just get out of there, but I didn't move. The light didn't just shine in one place. It slid in a pattern, almost like it was searching, and I couldn't tell if it was looking for me or for something else. Then, just like that, it clicked off. Not dimmed, not faded, just gone. The darkness returned instantly, thick and wet, like someone had pulled a blanket over the ocean. I sat there shaking, staring at nothing but black waves, trying to rationalize. Maybe a helicopter? Maybe some kind of weather drone? But no noise, not a hum, not a motor, nothing. Just silence and the water. That water. It was normal again, but colder than before, and it didn't make sense. I started heading back to the marina, keeping the engine steady. The waves lapped normally, but the sound felt different, hollow somehow. I tried talking to myself, out loud, to keep calm. I even cursed at the darkness, like shouting could make it less heavy. Nothing changed. A few minutes in, I noticed the fog. It wasn't dense, just a thin veil rising off the water, but it moved unnaturally, almost like it was being pulled along by something. It didn't swirl with the wind, it didn't drift, it just shifted slowly, smoothly, like it had a pattern of its own. I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks, eyes adjusting to black water and moonlight, but my stomach told me otherwise. Then I noticed the compass needle flick. Just a tiny jump, like someone tapped it, then it snapped back. Twice. 3 times. It never pointed away from north, but it hesitated. That shouldn't happen, especially not this far out with no metal overhead except my boat. I tried to call someone on the radio, the VHF, just to confirm I wasn't losing it. No response, just static. And then the weirdest thing, the static started sounding almost like breathing. Not mechanical interference, but a low, even hiss, like someone was right behind the speaker, inhaling and exhaling. My heart slammed, and I slammed the radio down. I glanced up at the clouds, thick now, low, and then I saw a faint glow behind them, almost imperceptible at first, like a lantern in a foggy window. It didn't move like an airplane light or a buoy, just hovered, steady, and then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. No fade, no blink, nothing. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I'd been staring at the black water too long, that the cold and fatigue were making me see things. I kept moving, slowly. But the feeling stayed, like someone or something was watching from above, waiting for me to slip up, waiting to see if I noticed. Every small sound, the slap of a wave against the hull, a gull far in the distance, the motor vibrating, felt amplified. I was on edge the entire way in. Halfway back, I swear I felt the water under the hull shift differently, heavier somehow, like I was moving through a pocket of air and then into a pocket of something else. It wasn't waves or currents I recognized. The boat didn't rock, but the motion in my stomach told me something was off. I slowed down, just floating for a second, and noticed the silence. Not even the hum of the engine seemed right. The ocean around me had this hollow, muted quality, like the world had temporarily lost depth. When I finally saw the lights of the marina, it felt like stepping into a separate universe. Normal, warm, human. I called the harbor master to tell him I'd be in, but I couldn't explain what I'd seen. Who would believe a beam of light cutting across the water, searching? Who would believe the fog moved like it had a mind, the compass flicking, the radio hissing like someone breathing? I tied the boat up and sat in the cabin, staring at the water through the window. Everything looked fine, quiet, peaceful. And yet, I couldn't shake the sensation that part of the ocean I'd been in was different now, like it had been touched by something I couldn't see. I went home after that, warmed up, ate some food, and tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that white light cutting across black water, smooth and relentless. I kept imagining it sliding, always searching, moving with a precision no human could manage. In the morning, I checked the boat. Nothing seemed damaged, nothing out of place. The waterline was normal, no signs anything had been below the surface except me and the usual marine life. Even the fog had disappeared. But I could still feel it in my fingers, in my chest, in the way the air smelled faintly metallic and cold when I breathed. I took the boat out a few nights later, tried to retrace my route. Nothing. No light, no fog, no feeling. Just water, black and indifferent under the moon. But the memory stuck, the weight of that moment pressing down. It's been a couple months, and I still think about it. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I imagine that beam sliding across my backyard, searching, precise, silent. I tell myself it was a trick of the mind, or a strange weather phenomenon, or some kind of plane or helicopter I didn't see. But nothing fits perfectly. Nothing explains the cold in the air, the way the water looked drained of color, the way the fog moved, or the radio. I haven't been back out past 10 o'clock since. The boat sits tied up in the marina, quiet. I still go out for day trips, nothing late at night, nothing past the regular routes. But sometimes when I'm alone on the water near dusk, I feel the weight of that beam again, pressing down, and I keep my head down, my hands steady, and I move. I've thought about trying to tell someone, Coast Guard, scientists, even a friend. But who would believe it? Not the way I remember it. It's real to me. That light was real. The cold was real. The silence was real. Everything else, I don't know. And that's the part that sticks the most. Not the beam itself, but that something like it could exist above the clouds, moving with purpose, unseen, and then just stop. I still see flashes of it when I blink. I still hear the faint hissing in quiet rooms, and sometimes, just sometimes, I catch myself staring at the sky, wondering if it's watching back. I launched the drone from the grassy berm behind the old airfield just as the sun was dropping. The place is half park, half forgotten runway. Tall grass, chain link with a sag in it, a couple of maintenance hangars that smell like oil and dust. I go there when I want open sky and no neighbors yelling about prop noise. That evening, the thermals were good and the light was sharp. I was trying to catch the last of the sun on the control tower for a time lapse. The first thing that felt off was the birds. There were usually swallows skimming over the grass at dusk, but they were nowhere. The air was quiet in a hollow way. No insects either, like someone had turned down the volume on the place. I shrugged it off, sent the drone up, and watched the live feed on my tablet. I'd been flying long enough to trust the way the machine moves. This time, a little after golden hour, something crossed the horizon on the north side of the field. At first, it looked like a lens flare, bright, round, but it moved. It cut across the frame, low over the hangars, then slid into the bank of cloud that had started to gather. The drone clocked it at a blink of speed and then a full stop, right at the cloud base. No sound that I could hear through the tablet, no echo from the field. Then, as if someone had pressed fast forward on reality, it was gone, inside the cloud, too quick for the eye to follow. I hit record out of reflex. I always record everything. What little footage I get is proof when a shot turns out to be something. On playback, the object is a hard-edged disc, not a smear. It hits the cloud bank and the pixels bloom around it for a frame like heat haze, and then nothing. The timestamp showed a clean 1-second gap where the object should have been, the cloud moving the same way before and after. I replayed the segment until my neck cramped. After I landed, I checked the SD card on the bench with a pocket lamp. The footage looked normal on my laptop in the car, except for that second. I uploaded a copy to my external drive and shoved the original card in my pocket. I told myself I'd post it later, call a couple of friends who shoot storms, and ask what they thought. Mostly I wanted someone to tell me I hadn't been tired or seeing things. I didn't sleep well. I kept picturing that blank white where the object entered the cloud. The next morning, I checked emails a few times and went about the day. Late afternoon, I noticed a sedan idling oddly at the far end of my street when I pulled into the driveway. No plates, windows too dark to see through. It sat there a beat longer than it should have, then rolled away. That was the kind of thing I'd usually ignore. You don't have to take every stranger at face value, but the car stayed in my head, and when an unknown number pinged my phone that evening and went straight to silence when I answered, I tightened up. 2 days later, a knock at the door came just after lunch. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, there were 2 men. Black suits, no logos, shoes polished the way people polish them when they expect to be stopped in a lobby and asked their name. They didn't look intimidating. They looked like men who practiced not wasting expressions. I let them in because curiosity won over caution. They introduced themselves in a soft way that almost suggested they were handing the choice to me. One of them held out a card with nothing on it. I said I didn't need a card. The taller one smiled very slightly and asked, plain as you would ask for the time, "Where is the SD card from your flight last evening?" The way he said it made my mouth go dry. "You mean the footage? Yeah, I have it. Why?" "For investigation purposes," the other man said, and his voice was low enough to be private. "We need the card." People who want data typically ask for a copy. They ask for files. Asking for the physical card and doing it with that particular tone was its own kind of pressure. I said no at first. I told them I kept backups and could copy anything they wanted. They listened, and the taller man nodded like he accepted the answer without being surprised. "We'll need the card," he said again, softer, "for chain of custody." He used jargon I'd heard only on crime shows and in a few conversations with a friend who works airport ops. Something about the phrasing put me on edge. If this were a prank, it was a detailed one. We stood in my narrow hallway trading small rationalities. I offered to copy the file there, right on my laptop. The men didn't move to sit. The one with the slightly wrinkled sleeve kept his hands folded, as if the idea of touching anything would mess up the situation. Digital copies can be altered, he said. We just need the original. His eyes found mine in a way that left no space for a response. The other man watched the ceiling fan turn. I handed over the card. It felt heavier than it should have. He took it with both hands like it was fragile, examined the label on the corner, and slipped it into a small padded envelope. There was a calm, corporate efficiency to what they did. No threats, no small talk, just focus. Before they left, the tall one said, "We appreciate your cooperation. Don't post anything until you've spoken with us again." I asked what department they were from. FAA? Police? Some university? They didn't answer directly. "Investigation," the tall one said. "We'll be in touch." They left the way they had arrived. No car on the street, no footsteps through the yard. For a second after the door shut, I thought I heard a car fade down the block. But there was also the hum of the refrigerator and the kettle starting in the kitchen, so it could have been anything. I tried to get back to regular life. I called my friend Mara, who edits for a local paper. She said she could check footage for lens artifacts or other issues, and she asked if I'd uploaded the file anywhere. I told her I'd given the card to the men. She sounded annoyed on the line, but not surprised. "People who want that kind of thing don't say investigation and leave envelopes with manners," she said. "They have forms." The next evening, the local news ran a short about some pilots who'd reported an errant drone near the airfield. The story said nothing about discs or missing frames. It quoted a source from Airfield Ops who said the issue was resolved. I watched it twice and felt a lump in my throat because the station footage showed the exact stretch of fence where I'd taken off, empty and ordinary. A week later, no one called, no email, no official badge in the mail. I kept checking the envelope. Its flap had been sealed with tape, then opened, then taped again. The card was gone. That night, I found another car in my street, different make, the same quiet waiting. I sat at my table until 2 a.m. with the kitchen light on and the tablet beside me. But I didn't fly anything. The drone hummed in its bag on the shelf, the battery cool. I plugged the external drive into the laptop and scrolled through footage folders, looking for the copy I had made right after the flight. The backup file was there, but when I opened it, the timeline leapt a few seconds. Where the object had entered the cloud was a black frame, and then, one frame later, the cloud was in a slightly different place. The encoding showed no errors, nothing corrupted, just a clean jump like a cut someone had made. I thought about going to the station and asking questions. I thought about posting the clip online. I thought about how small and explainable my life usually felt. Instead, I shut the laptop and walked to the window to see if the car had moved. It was gone. 2 weeks later, a man in a plain suit left a small, anonymous envelope on my porch. Inside was one single printout, a still from my footage, the frame before the object hit the cloud. They'd cropped it so tight, the disc filled the page like a coin. Someone had printed it on nice paper, not my printer. On the back was, "Please exercise discretion," and nothing else. I taped the print to the inside of my storage cabinet where I keep propellers and spare batteries. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what they are. I don't know whether handing the card over calmed something or started something. All I know is that the birds haven't quite returned to the airfield the same way they used to. And when I stand on the berm at dusk, it feels stranger to look at the clouds. I still fly sometimes, but I always set the recorder to save to 2 cards and 1 drive, and I keep a copy physically separated, just in case. I was on the roof because the roof is the only place in my block that still has darkness enough to see anything beyond the sodium street lamps. I'd set the telescope up between the rusting HVAC units and a dying potted palm, tripod feet on the gravel, red headlamp tucked into my jacket so I wouldn't wreck my night vision. My name's Marco Reyes. I'm not an astronomer, just someone who likes to point expensive glass at empty bits of sky and try to make sense of the small things moving up there. The night was the kind of cold that sharpens edges. Late October, clear, with a thin crescent moon. I was logging the Cassiopeia sweep when my planet tracking app pinged a satellite pass. I always check satellites. They move like they're on rails. This didn't. At first I saw 4 points of light, evenly spaced, crawling across the sky as if someone had snapped a line of LEDs into place. They held formation perfectly. No drift, no jitter. Just that quiet, mechanical glide. Then they did something that made me sit back from the eyepiece because it made no sense in any of the little rhythms I knew. The formation split. Not a diffusion or a scattering like a flock of birds, but a clean break. The 4 points arranged into a square, then 2 points slotted inward to make a diamond. And suddenly one of the points folded inward on an angle so sharp it looked like the light had just stopped being a dot and was now an edge. The motion was instantaneous, like a page flipping. I blinked and the thing had changed again, corners forming and reforming, more geometry than flight. I checked the scope for reflection, tapped the eyepiece, thought maybe an internal glitch. The live feed on my phone showed the same thing, just smaller, so it wasn't me hallucinating. I started recording because that's what you do when something refuses to behave. You make a copy, so later you can argue with it. The lights moved with that odd, clean choreography for maybe 3 minutes. They'd push in, snap apart, slide sideways without the faintest arc, vanish for a blink, and reappear a fraction of a degree away. No sound at all. The air on the roof was ordinary, traffic down the avenue, a dog barking once, a far plane. But the motion itself had the wrong physics. Sharp turns that would tear apart any aerodynamic surface, pauses that weren't pauses but jumps. After 10 minutes, I felt stupid and small and intensely awake all at once. The sky settled back into its normal scatter. An airplane crossed with its blinking nav lights, a satellite that actually behaved like a satellite. I packed the scope away with my hands, still a little clumsy. I thumbed the recording and saw the file, the little thumbnail moving, but when I tried to open it, my phone choked. File corrupted, the media app said, which is the polite way electronics tell you you don't own the moment you thought you owned. I shrugged and went inside because it was late and because there's always the argument that rooftops have the best ghosts. The next morning, I had to get up for work at the public library downtown. I've been the evening reference librarian there for 3 years. The job is mostly lending answers and shushing teenagers. Library work is sensible, which is why what happened after the roof felt strange on top of strange. I walked out of the staff entrance at 8:15 and 2 men were on the sidewalk across the street. I noticed them because the morning felt ordinary, and then the men were there. 2 dark silhouettes in suits unlike anything you see on a Tuesday outside a library. Black wool, narrow ties, shoes so clean they looked new. They were standing under the awning of a closed storefront, both staring in the exact direction of the library entrance. They weren't talking, they weren't shifting weight, they were just watching. There was something about them that made my stomach drop slow and precise. The way they held still like a camera prevents motion blur. The sameness of their posture, the way they avoided buying coffee or even pretending to check their phones. It was the way movie extras look when the director hasn't called rap. I told myself I was being childish. Maybe they were waiting for a friend, maybe they were private security. People wait on sidewalks all the time. I changed my route to the front door because the staff entrance was closer, but as I passed the window of the bakery across the street, I caught them out of the corner of my eye. Still there, still watching. Inside, I couldn't focus. Someone asked me where the genealogy microfilm was, and I pointed and then had to go back and look at the copy of the roof video I'd finally managed to force into existence on my backup drive. The file opened this time, but there was a single frame where the lights folded inward that was pure white, like someone had erased that instant. I scrubbed back and forth, and the white frame stayed the size of a single heartbeat. At 11, I told my supervisor I wasn't feeling well. He raised an eyebrow. People call in for colds all the time, but I could see him thinking it over and deciding the day would pass without me. When I walked back out to the staff entrance, the 2 men were closer now, under the plane trees by the newsstand, still staring at the library door. They hadn't budged. They didn't follow me. They didn't approach. They merely stood and watched in that slow, Spectator silence until I rounded the corner and started home with my chest a little tight and the afternoon wide open. The whole way back, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting them to be driving behind me the way men in suits in bad movies do. The street was empty except for a delivery van. The world had its usual noise: trains, a kid on a bicycle, someone on a lawnmower. I should have called someone: police, a friend, a manager, but the rational options reeked a little of overreaction. Excuse me, there are two men staring at my workplace doesn't sit comfortably in the phone. Instead, I sat on my couch and tried to make sense of the white frame. I tried to find the moment again on my site clipboard, dug the backup card out of the glove box, but a day later, the file behaved differently. The recording would play up to the white frame and then, as if bored, jump forward a second and resume. Not corrupted, altered in a way that looked like someone had edited the world's continuity. Over the next 48 hours, other little things piled up around that first weirdness. My apartment clock lost 7 minutes and then caught back up. My neighbor told me her baby monitor recorded a burst of static at 2 a.m. No voice, no melody, just a thin sweep like the breath of old radio tubes. My phone battery drained faster than it had any right to. The weather app on my tablet showed rain for the afternoon the next week, and then, when I checked again, a different forecast. Small, plausible glitches, each one wearing the shape of coincidence. On Wednesday, I went back to work. I said I'd been clear-headed all morning, and meant it at first until I rounded the newsstand and the men were there again. A little further down, still in their suits and still watching the door like they were cataloging the comings and goings. A mother with a stroller paused and looked at them and then hurried away differently, like her sense of a normal morning had shifted. A bus driver swapped a look with a shopkeeper and then shrugged it off. The men kept watching. When I left early again at lunchtime, they watched me a while longer. From the sidewalk, their faces were as blank as copies. No sunglasses to hide eyes, nothing to anchor them to the rest of the city. I kept my head down and walked. The whole time I had the odd sensation that they knew which pocket held the telescope key, that they had the white frame of my video memorized like a schedule. I thought about parking across town for the evening, about sleeping at a friend's, about changing my clothes and vanishing for a night, but I didn't do any of those things. I walked home because habit is a tie. That night I tried to be ordinary. I cooked pasta, I did the dishes, I pretended the sky was the same sky. The topaz of the streetlight through the blinds looked the same as it ever did. I left a red headlamp in the drawer by the door, just in case. When I closed my eyes, the white frame was a bright, jagged thing behind my eyelids. I don't know what those lights were on the roof. I don't know who the men were on the sidewalk. I don't know whether the missing frame is a hole someone cut in time, or a bad app, or a trick of electronics colluding with my nerves. All I know is that the city felt a little watched for a while, like when you notice a new camera and can't unsee it. I also know I left work early 2 days running and that two men in suits stood across the street both times and did nothing but look until I was gone. I'd been flying small aircraft for over a decade, mostly charter flights and the occasional sightseeing trip. That afternoon was routine, a short hop from Billings to a private strip just outside of Sheridan. It was cold, clear air with a thin layer of high clouds. I remember thinking the light had that washed-out silvery look you get in winter when the sun can't quite burn through. I was about 30 minutes from landing when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a break in the clouds catching the sun in an odd way. But it moved, fast. A metallic disc dropped straight down from the cloud layer, perfectly vertical, no tilt, no wobble. It stopped midair, hung there for maybe 2 seconds, then shot off horizontally and vanished into the haze over the mountains. No sound, no contrail, nothing. I didn't even have time to react before it was gone. My first thought was that I'd just seen another plane from a weird angle, but there were no wings. It was too smooth, too clean. I kept glancing at my instruments, half expecting something to go haywire, but everything stayed normal. I landed without incident and taxied toward the hangar. That's when I noticed them. Two men standing just inside the shadow of the building. Both wore black suits, white shirts, plain dark ties, no coats, even though it was barely 25 degrees out. One was tall and thin, the other shorter, broader in the shoulders. Both were pale, like they hadn't seen sunlight in months. They didn't approach me at first. They just stood there as I shut down the engine and climbed out. Then the taller one stepped forward and said, "Mr. Harlan?" in a flat, almost mechanical voice. I nodded, still trying to place how they knew my name. "We'd like a moment of your time," the shorter one said. He held a clipboard with a few sheets of paper clipped to it. "We understand you observed an aerial anomaly on your approach." I froze. I hadn't called anyone about it. I hadn't even decided what to call it myself. "I saw something," I said. "Not sure what." "That's why we're here," the taller one replied. "This is standard procedure for atmospheric interference reports in controlled airspace." He handed me a pen, flipping the clipboard toward me. The paper was some kind of form with small, dense text. The only words I caught on the first glance were atmospheric interference and no threat to flight safety. They wanted me to sign at the bottom, confirming that whatever I'd seen had been a known atmospheric effect. No mention of aircraft, no mention of unidentified anything. I didn't sign right away. "Who are you with?" I asked. "Federal jurisdiction," the shorter man said, as if that explained everything. "Which agency?" He just repeated, "Federal jurisdiction." The wind was picking up, and I could hear the hangar doors rattling behind them. I realized no one else was around. The guy who usually handled my arrivals wasn't there, and the fuel truck was parked with no driver in sight. The whole airstrip felt empty. "Look," I said, "I don't feel comfortable signing something when I don't even." "You did see atmospheric interference," the taller one cut in. It wasn't a question. His voice didn't get louder, and but it carried this strange weight, like I was already supposed to agree. "I saw a metallic object," I said slowly. "Not." The shorter man stepped closer, so close I could see tiny flecks in his irises, though they didn't look quite right. Too uniform in color, almost gray. "The object you saw was not metallic," he said, as if correcting me. "It was atmospheric interference." I glanced toward the small terminal building, thinking maybe someone would walk out, but the windows were dark. It occurred to me then that I hadn't heard a single other engine or voice since landing. The taller man extended the clipboard again. "Please sign, Mr. Harlan. We have other matters to attend to." Something in me just wanted to get out of there. I signed my name without reading the rest of the form. The shorter man pulled the paper away the moment my pen left the page, tucking it under his arm. They both stepped back in unison, as if the conversation was over. No handshake, no thank you. Just a slight nod from the taller one before they turned and walked into the shadowed part of the hangar. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide whether to follow them, but when I stepped inside, the hangar was empty. No open doors on the far side, nowhere they could have gone without me seeing. The sound of another plane starting up somewhere down the strip broke the silence, and suddenly the place felt normal again. My usual ground crew guy appeared from around the corner asking if I needed fuel. When I asked if he'd seen the two men who'd just been here, he looked at me blankly and said no one had been around all day. I didn't push it. I just paid for my fuel and left. But when I checked my cockpit later, I noticed my flight log, where I jot down quick notes after landing, was gone. The pen I kept clipped to the side was still there, but the notepad wasn't. I never saw those men again. It started on a Thursday night in early spring. My parents were out late. Mom was at her book club. Dad was working the evening shift at the mill, so I had the house to myself. I was in my room, half listening to music and flipping through stations on the ham radio I'd been messing around with for the last year. I'd bought it secondhand from a guy named Larry, who ran a booth at the county flea market. He showed me the basics, and I'd been slowly figuring out the rest on my own. Usually, I just picked up local chatter, truckers, hobbyists, weather reports. But that night, I landed on something I'd never heard before. It was a voice, but not speaking English, not Spanish either. It didn't sound like anything I recognized, short, clipped words, almost rhythmic, like the speaker was reading from a code book. No music, no static, just this steady stream of syllables. I wrote some of them down in my notebook, like the way they sounded to me. Then the voice stopped, and there was a long pause. I was about to switch frequencies when a different voice came through. This one, slower, deeper. It read out a string of numbers, then repeated them. 43.819, 122.475. I didn't know what they meant. Coordinates maybe, but I didn't check right away. I just sat there, waiting for more, but the frequency went dead. I flipped through every channel I could reach, but I didn't hear anything like it again. I wrote the numbers down under the words I'd copied. The next day after school, I put them into Google Maps. The location was just a patch of woods about 20 miles south of town, near a place called Devil's Hollow. I'd driven past it with my dad before. It's nothing special, just farmland and tree lines. I didn't tell anyone about it. It wasn't like I thought I'd discovered something huge. It was just weird. I kept the notebook in my desk drawer and figured that was that. The knock came the next afternoon, right after I got home from school. Two men stood on the porch. Both wore black suits with white shirts, black ties. No logos, no badges. One was tall and thin with pale skin and a sharp jawline. The other was shorter, heavier, with dark hair combed straight back. They didn't smile. The tall one said my name, like he was confirming it. Then he asked, "You have a radio set in your room?" I froze for a second. "Yeah," I said. "We'd like to see your radio logs," he said. Not "may we" or "please." Just flat, like it was a given. I didn't move right away. I asked who they were with. The shorter one reached into his coat pocket, and for a second I thought he was going to show me an ID. But he just took out a small black notebook and flipped it open. I couldn't see what was in it from the doorway. He said, "You picked up a transmission yesterday. We need to verify your records." I told them I didn't think I had to give them anything without my parents home. The tall one looked at the other, then back at me. "Nothing to worry about," he said. "We just need to make sure it's logged correctly. It's for your safety." I remember those exact words. For your safety. They didn't fit the way he said them. I told them I could take their information and have my dad call them. They glanced at each other again. The shorter one closed his notebook. "We'll be back," he said. And they turned and walked down the driveway toward a black sedan parked at the curb. I watched from the window as they got in. The car didn't have plates. That night, I checked my notebook. The page with the strange words and numbers was gone, not torn out. Gone, like it had never been there. All the other pages were intact, my handwriting exactly where I'd left it. Just that one entry missing. I kept the radio off for a few days. The following week, I was sitting on my bed doing homework when the radio clicked on by itself. I swear I hadn't touched it. It went straight to static, then the same deep voice came through. 3.819, 122.475. I didn't write it down. That night, I dreamed I was walking through a stand of bare trees. I could hear voices ahead of me, but I couldn't see anyone. The ground under my feet felt soft, almost like wet sand, even though the trees looked like winter. When I woke up, the radio was on again, just hissing static. The power switch was flipped to off, but it was still making noise. I unplugged it and shoved it in my closet. 2 nights later, I was coming home from a friend's place after dark. When I turned onto my street, there was a black sedan parked 2 houses down from mine. The same model, same color as before. As I passed, I glanced through the driver's side window. The tall man from before was sitting there, hands on the wheel, looking straight ahead. He didn't move. I parked in my driveway and sat there for a minute, pretending to check my phone. When I looked up, the car was gone. I haven't used the radio since. I was out by the east pasture just before sunset, checking the fencing. We'd had a couple calves get out earlier in the week, and I didn't want to repeat. The air was still, just that kind of soft, heavy stillness you get before the light really starts fading. No wind, no bugs, no distant tractors. Just quiet. I'd parked my ATV near the gate and was walking the fence line with a roll of wire and my gloves hanging out of my back pocket. About halfway along the north side, I saw something out past the hayfield. It was just over the middle section, maybe 20 feet above the ground, hovering. It took me a second to really process what I was looking at. It wasn't round like you'd expect from a balloon or a drone. It was all hard angles, like two pyramids stuck base to base, except the points were cut off. Metallic, but not shiny in a normal way. It wasn't reflecting the sunset so much as catching the light unevenly, like there were flat panels that shifted in brightness when it rotated. And it was rotating, slowly steady, like it was on a turntable. I stood there for a good 10 seconds before I started moving toward it. I remember my boots making that dry crunch against the grass, the sound feeling way too loud in the quiet. The thing didn't move away, just kept spinning. When I got maybe 50 yards from it, it tilted. Not all the way, just enough that one of the flat faces was angled down toward me. I swear it felt like it was looking. I stopped without thinking about it. The tilt stayed for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, then it straightened back out, and then, without any noise or buildup, it shot off. Not up, not at an angle, just straight east, dead level, like it was pulled by a wire. It was gone in less than a second. No fade out, no wobble, just there and then gone. I walked the rest of the way to where it had been. The grass there looked normal at first, nothing burned or crushed. I stood for a minute, feeling stupid, half expecting it to come back. When nothing happened, I went back to the ATV and finished checking the fence. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was scared, exactly, more because I couldn't figure out what the hell I'd seen. The next morning, I went out early. Sun was just coming up, dew still on the ground. I walked straight to that spot in the hayfield. That's when I noticed it. Every single blade of grass in a circle maybe 20 feet across was bent. Not broken or flattened like something had landed on it, but bent over at the same angle, all pointing in the same direction, east, the same way the thing had shot off. Even the little weeds between the grass were leaning the same way. I ran my hand over the tops. They weren't springing back up. It was like they'd grown that way. I didn't touch it after that, didn't cut it, didn't mow over it. Just left the patch there. Over the next couple weeks, the grass in that circle stayed bent, even as the rest of the field grew up around it. After about a month, it finally got mowed down with the rest of the hay, but I never saw anything like it again. The strangest part wasn't even seeing the thing in the air. It was standing there in the field the next day in the early morning quiet, looking at all that grass leaning east like something had brushed over it in a perfect circle. That stuck with me more than anything else. I was halfway between towns on that long stretch of 2-lane that runs through nothing but corn and the occasional farmhouse when I first saw the lights in my rear view. It was late, well past midnight, and I'd left the bar early because I didn't want to wait around for drunk drivers. The highway was empty the way it gets when everyone else's headlights have gone to sleep. My own beam cutting a clean path through the dark, radio off, windows cracked to keep me from dozing. There was that pair of lights, close enough to register as a single bright point in the middle of the mirror. At first, I didn't give them more thought than anyone would. Another car, maybe someone late getting off work. The way they sat there in the mirror, though, didn't feel right. They weren't widening the way approaching headlights should. They stayed the same distance back while the black ribbon of road unrolled ahead of me. I glanced down at the speedometer, 70. I eased off just a bit, down to 65, and the lights mirrored me. They eased back, the same measured space between us. I accelerated to 75, and they matched me again, like someone had a limiter on them that kept them at a single, patient gap. Not tailgating, just an impossible, constant separation. There were a dozen things I could have done to test it. Pull over and let them pass, move over and speed up until they had to swing wide, flash my brights. I did a little of all three in the next 2 minutes, and nothing changed. When I pulled onto the gravel of a wide turnout to let them by, they didn't. They sat there in the mirror, a steady, motionless pair. No brake lights, no passing glow of a cab or the strobe of a truck's marker lights. Just two white ovals. I watched them from under my hat brim and felt that small, prickly awareness that comes with being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I got back on the road. For a while, I drove with the classical logic of any reasonable person. Keep to the right, keep moving, don't give the thing reason to act. The highway curved gently, and a county sign told me I had 20 miles to the next town. The lights stayed behind me, even as my sedan ate up the dark. When there was no town at all, just the grain elevators like industrial moons in the distance, they kept pace like a shadow. Slow drivers have a way of deciding the road. I remember thinking I should pull off at the next gas station and wait them out till daylight, till traffic. But the hour was late and I didn't like the idea of some stranger in a parking lot. Instead, I kept going, kept the heater low, thumbed my phone to see if the GPS had any reason to bat an eye at my route. No bars out here. The screen was all gray. No help in the glove compartment either, only a paper map that folded itself like a secret. The first odd, quiet thing that made me look up was when everything around me seemed to lean inward. The corn husks murmured. The wind in the wires at the roadside took a slightly wrong note, and the insects' chorus thinned. The sound wasn't gone, not yet. It was as if the world had put a hand over a radio and turned the dial down a notch. I couldn't tell if I'd imagined it until I glanced again, and the lights had stopped moving in the mirror. Not approaching, not holding pace. Stopped, pinned to one place. I pulled my sedan into the next lay-by, engine thrumming. My heartbeat sounded loud in the confined space of the car. I didn't cut the engine at first. I kept it idling, dim dashboard glow, because it felt safer to be behind something mechanical than to step into open air. The lights in the mirror sat perfectly still for a long minute, then blinked. A slow, deliberate blink like a camera shutter. When they opened, they were higher. They rose straight up above the line of trees that marked the edge of the field, as if somebody had taken them on an invisible rope and hoisted them. There was no sound, no hum of engine, no wind of displacement, no metal whisper. The pair of lights became two white orbs against the black, then began to drift. At first, the movement was so slight I thought the earth might be turning beneath them. They drifted in unison, level and placid, glided away from me toward the horizon like lanterns tugged by the same gentle hand. I remember thinking for a dumb second that they were balloons with lights tied to them. Some prank gone strange. But balloons don't keep perfect altitude, and they don't move away with that absolute refusal to accelerate. These orbs slid off into the night, getting smaller until they winked out like a distant plane being turned off mid-flight. As soon as they were above the tree line and gone, the world came back like someone unclenching. The crickets restarted their chorus, first a single cautious note, then full force. A freight train's faint rumble came from some far line. The wind picked up little eddies along the roadside, and the county sign's reflective letters glinted back my headlights. I laughed then, an edge of hysteria, because after a minute of nothing, I was suddenly aware of how alone I'd felt. I climbed back in and drove. There were no other cars for the rest of that run. No cross-traffic blinking through an intersection, no high beams in the distance, not even a pair of taillights for the next 10 or 20 miles. The little diner on Route 9 was dark, its neon sign unlit. Everything had the hush of a town that's decided it's done being awake. I tried to tell myself I was tired, that the hours had stretched thin and played wrinkle faces with my perception. The highway under my wheels was mercilessly ordinary. Paint lines, weeds at the shoulder, the soft thump of my tires over a patched seam. I kept expecting some sign that the world had resumed its rules when the strange pair of lights left. A car to pass me, a semi to huff by with a horn. Nothing. The silence felt like an audience taking a breath and holding it again. When I got home, the driveway was empty. I killed the engine, sat there for a second with my hands on the wheel, thinking about calling someone, anyone, and then looked up. The sky over my little suburban block was the same as any other night. Dots of stars, the low sheen of a neighbor's porch light, the flicker of an upstairs television through a window. No lights made their lazy arc back over the horizon. No orbs hung by ropes that someone would later admit were an art project. Nothing suggested that the moment out on the empty highway had been anything other than a trick my brain performed to keep from being alone at night. I could have slept. I should have. Instead, I went inside, sat at my kitchen table, and made a cup of coffee that tasted like nothing. The house creaked in small, normal ways. Pipes, thirsty, settling frames, the faint mechanical sympathy of refrigerators. I told myself at least 3 stories. Tiredness, a prank, a weather balloon. None felt quite right. A part of me wanted to go back out and find the spot where they'd risen, as if that would anchor the memory. Another part wanted to put the whole night in a drawer and never open it. In the end, I left the diner light off and the curtains closed and climbed into bed. I don't think about the lights all the time, but there are evenings when I drive that road and the memory sits at the back of my head, patient as a license plate. I'll glance in the mirror and make sure the lane behind me is empty, not because I'm expecting anything to follow, but because the idea that something could keep a distance from you for so long, and then, without sound or hurry, simply lift away, that idea stays with you. It sits in the bones like a draft. I was sitting on the beach near Gray's Cove, just north of Cape Elizabeth in Maine. It was late August, maybe around 9:30 p.m., and the air had cooled off just enough after a hot day. The sky was clear, a little hazy near the horizon, but nothing unusual for this part of the coast. I was alone, just me and the steady sound of waves breaking over the rocks and sand. I'd come down to the water after dinner, hoping to unwind a bit. The beach was mostly empty, just a couple of other folks scattered far apart. I found a spot on the sand where the tide had pulled back and settled in. The sun had long dipped below the trees, but there was still some light fading the last glow of dusk. As I stared out toward the horizon, something caught my eye. A row of tiny lights hovering just above where the water met the sky. At first, I thought it was a fishing boat, or maybe a set of buoys, but the lights were too evenly spaced and didn't move like boats do. They stayed perfectly lined up, maybe 100 feet apart, just hovering there, suspended in the air. I pulled out my phone to check the time and tried to zoom in, but the screen barely showed anything more than blurry dots. I put the phone away and focused on watching them. The lights were steady, no flickering or changing colors. They looked like small lanterns hung from invisible strings, glowing a soft yellowish white. A few minutes passed, and I noticed the fog rolling in a little from the east, just enough to thin the clarity of the lights but not obscure them. The tide was moving in steadily, the waves now louder as they rolled over the rocks and washed onto the shore. But the lights didn't move or sway like they should if they were floating on the water or hanging from anything. They stayed perfectly still. I glanced back at the beach. A family was packing up a cooler nearby, but they weren't looking out at the lights. Nobody seemed to notice, or maybe nobody else was watching. I wasn't even sure if I should be paying attention. I figured I might just be tired and imagining things, but the lights kept me hooked. I had the feeling I wasn't supposed to see them, but I couldn't look away. After maybe 20 minutes, I noticed one of the lights start to fade, almost like it was blinking out. Then, slowly, it dropped straight down toward the ocean, disappearing beneath the waves without a splash or ripple. I thought maybe it was just going behind a wave, but the surface looked calm right there. No disturbance at all. One by one, the other lights followed. Each one dropped straight down in the same slow, smooth way and vanished as soon as it touched the water. No noise, no splash, just gone. The last light lingered the longest, hovering there quietly for what felt like forever, then it too sank below the horizon. I sat there for a while longer, feeling the cool sand under my hands and the night air settling around me. The ocean was just the ocean again. Nothing out of the ordinary except for the deep quiet that had fallen. No lights, no movement, no explanation. When I finally stood up and started walking back to my car, I felt strangely exposed, like I'd been watched the whole time but couldn't see who or what was watching. The fog had thickened in places along the shore, and the few street lamps near the parking lot flickered in a way that felt off, like they were struggling against something unseen. On the drive home, my headlights caught glimpses of the water on either side of the road, the way it stretched out into darkness. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those lights trailing behind me, but the road was empty. When I got home, I checked the news and social media. Nothing about strange lights or missing boats, just the usual summer stories and traffic updates. I even called the harbor office the next day, asking if there had been any unusual activity or reports, but the voice on the line sounded tired and said nothing had come up. I haven't been back to that beach at night since. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see those lights hanging there, and I wonder what they really were. But Mostly, I just remember the silence, the way the ocean swallowed those lights without a sound, and how quiet the world became after they disappeared. It was raining that Thursday morning, not a heavy downpour, just that steady, misty kind that gets into your clothes no matter how fast you walk. I'd missed my earlier bus, so I ended up on the 7:20 into the city, which I almost never take. I remember being annoyed because I knew it would be more crowded, more stop and go. The bus smelled like wet coats and cheap coffee. I slid into an empty aisle seat near the middle and tried to shake the rain off my hood without hitting the person next to me. I was already pulling out my earbuds when I noticed the man 2 rows ahead by the window. Noticed him for no reason at first. Just another passenger, maybe mid-30s, short, dark hair, wearing a gray windbreaker and jeans. He had this small scar, maybe half an inch, above his right eyebrow, a faint little crescent shape. I don't know why I clocked it, just something my eyes picked up before I looked away. The bus jerked forward and I settled in, looking out the rain-blurred window. But a few minutes later, when we pulled up to the next stop, I caught sight of someone else climbing aboard. My stomach tightened before my brain even figured out why. He was wearing the same gray windbreaker, same jeans, same short dark hair, and when he turned to look down the aisle for a seat, same face. Exactly the same. It wasn't just that they could have been brothers, it was the same. The scar was in the same place, same faint line above the eyebrow. The shape of the nose, the jaw, even the way they both held their shoulders slightly forward. I looked back at the first guy, 2 rows ahead, and then at the new one standing in the aisle. Neither of them reacted. No recognition. The second one finally sat toward the back, on the opposite side of the bus, a few seats behind me. I told myself maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I just glanced too quickly. But every time I checked, pretending to adjust my hair or look around, it was still true. Same face, same clothes. The only difference was that the one near the front kept his eyes out the window, while the one behind me stared straight ahead most of the ride. At one point, I got up to let someone out of my row and caught the back one in my peripheral vision. I turned just enough to see his eyes. Same exact shade of light brown as the first. He blinked slowly, not breaking eye contact, and then looked away like nothing happened. A woman sitting across from me must have noticed I kept glancing back because she gave me this little frown like she thought I was being nosy. But I couldn't help it. I wanted to see something, a smirk, a nod, some sign they were in on a joke. But they didn't look at each other, not once. When we hit the highway stretch, the bus got quiet except for the tires on wet pavement. I put my earbuds in but didn't play anything. I wanted to hear if they spoke. They didn't. A few stops later, the guy in the front got up and walked toward the door. As he passed my row, I caught a whiff of something sharp, like metal or maybe that weird smell electronics have when they overheat. He stepped off into the drizzle without looking back. The second one stayed seated. I thought, okay, maybe now I can relax. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. But 2 stops later, the second one stood and got off too, at a completely different part of town. That should have been the end of it. But when I reached my stop and got off, I saw him again. The first one, across the street, under an awning. No umbrella, hands in his pockets, just staring down the block. I froze because I didn't think he'd see me. Then his head turned, slow, deliberate, and his eyes locked on mine. No smile, no nod, just watching. I started walking toward my office, telling myself to knock it off, stop being paranoid. But halfway down the block, a reflection in a shop window made me glance back. The other one, the second one, was crossing the street behind me. I walked faster, cutting down a side street, and when I finally reached my building, I didn't look around again. I badged in, took the elevator up, and tried to focus on work. But at lunch, when I went down to the cafe in the lobby, I saw a figure pass by outside, gray windbreaker. I didn't leave the office until after dark, and I took a different bus home. The whole ride I kept my head down, barely looking at anyone. But at one point, we stopped at a light, and I glanced out. Across the intersection, leaning against a lamppost in the drizzle, someone stood watching the bus. Gray windbreaker. Small crescent scar over the eyebrow. I work at the public library in a small college town in Vermont. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, and the pace is slow, especially during the late afternoon when classes are over, but most people haven't come home yet. I've been the assistant librarian here for about 3 years now, and my main job is helping people find research materials, mostly related to environmental science and forestry. That's my field, studied it in school, still pretty passionate about it. It started a few months ago. One afternoon, just before closing, I noticed a man sitting in the back corner of the reading room. It was unusual because that corner is mostly empty, and it faces away from the main floor. I don't remember seeing him before. He wore a simple dark jacket and jeans, and his hair was neatly combed, but his posture was stiff, almost unnatural. He had a notebook and a pen, but no laptop or phone. What caught my attention first was the books stacked quietly on the table in front of him. They were all on very specific topics: botany, old forestry techniques, plant ecology. Basically, exactly the kind of books I spend most of my time helping students find. But there was something odd. None of the books had due dates stamped on them. In fact, none of them looked checked out at all. I thought maybe he was just reading them here. I've seen that before, but the way he behaved was strange. Whenever I glanced over, he was looking down at the table, never at the books. When I turned back to the computer or helped someone else, he'd quietly reach for one, flip a page, then set it back down immediately. No notes, no bookmarks, nothing. He never made eye contact with anyone. Even when the library got quieter and the few other patrons left, he just sat there facing the wall, almost like he was hiding. I tried to catch his attention once. "Hey, do you need help finding anything?" I asked, walking over casually. He didn't respond, just kept scribbling something in his notebook, but the handwriting was neat and methodical. Numbers, letters, some sort of charts maybe. I tried again a few minutes later, but he just looked down and didn't say a word. I figured he was just shy or maybe didn't want to talk. No big deal. But then the weirdness started piling up. Over the next couple of weeks, he showed up almost every day around the same time. Always the same spot. Always the same pile of books on my field of study. And every time the books stayed on the table, never taken out or checked out. The notebook was always there, and I noticed the pages kept turning, but no notes ever left the library. One afternoon, the power flickered for a second. When the lights came back, he was gone. I looked all over, but no sign of him. The books were still there, untouched. I thought maybe he left early. But then the next day, he was back. Same spot, same routine. I started asking around, asked some of the regular students and other staff if they'd seen him. Nobody had. It was like he appeared out of nowhere. Then something else happened. I was shelving books in the environmental science section when I found one of the books from his stack sitting on the floor between the shelves. Weird because it was in a completely different area and it wasn't there the day before. I looked at it, flipped through a few pages. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed a small mark on the inside cover. A faint, barely noticeable symbol. Like a triangle with 3 dots inside it. I'd never seen anything like it in a library book before. I brought it to the desk and compared it to the other copies. None of them had the mark. I asked the cataloging librarian about it, but she was stumped. "Maybe a previous owner wrote it," she said. But these were library books, part of a set we got years ago. No one should have been writing in them. The mark stayed in my mind. A few days later, I caught him looking at me. I was shelving new arrivals when I glanced up and saw him out of the corner of my eye. He was facing the wall as usual, but his head was turned slightly, and for a brief moment our eyes met. His were gray, but empty somehow, like there was nothing behind them. I looked away quickly, feeling a chill. When I looked back, he was pretending to write in his notebook again. I stopped shelving and just watched. He didn't move for a long time. Then the strangest thing happened. The next day, the books he'd been reading were gone from the table. No sign of them anywhere in the library. I checked the checkout logs. No one had checked them out. I looked through the stacks and even asked other librarians if anyone had moved them. No one. I asked the cleaning crew, but they said they hadn't touched that table. It was like the books had vanished. I told Sarah, my girlfriend, about it that evening. She said I should stop paying attention to it, that I was making myself paranoid. I wasn't sure. It didn't feel like paranoia. Over the next week, I tried to watch him more closely. Sometimes I'd catch him just staring at the wall for minutes without moving. Other times, flipping pages in books, but never reading them. One afternoon, I found a book in his stack that wasn't supposed to be in the library at all. A copy of some obscure forestry manual from the 40s that we never got. I checked the catalog and it wasn't listed anywhere. I tried to follow him after he left once. He walked slowly down the street, but then disappeared into the thick woods behind the library. I stood there for a while but didn't see him come out. That night, I went home and found my front door unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it. Inside, nothing was missing, but on my kitchen table was one of those books, the old forestry manual he had with him. I hadn't brought it home. Sarah hadn't been there. I called her, and she said she didn't know anything about it. I put the book back in my car and decided to take it back the next day. When I went back to the library, the man was there again, sitting in his corner like always. I wanted to talk to him to ask who he was, but I couldn't. He never said a word, never looked me in the eye again. I left the old book on the table near him and walked away. He glanced at it once, then went back to staring at the wall. After that, I started noticing little things. Papers on my desk moved, my computer clock changing by a few minutes, and once I saw a figure outside my window late at night that didn't look quite human, standing still under the porch light before vanishing. I never saw the man again after that day. The books he left behind slowly returned to the shelves with no sign of anyone taking them. The old manual disappeared from my car. Sometimes I still wonder who he was, why he chose those books, and what he wanted from me. But I never got any answers, just the quiet library, the empty chair in the corner, and the feeling that something was watching from the shadows. My name's Ryan Garza. I grew up in Midland, so I've been out to the Davis Mountains more times than I can count. Mostly for stargazing or just at the flat nothing for a while. This happened 2 summers ago, late July, when I took my wife Marlene and our 2 kids camping out near Fort Davis. We'd picked a spot a couple miles off the main road, not far from one of those big bouldered hills. It wasn't an official campsite, just a clearing we'd found before on a hiking trip. I'd parked the truck off the dirt trail and we set up the tents while the kids chased each other around, stirring up dust. The first day was normal, hot in the afternoon, cool in the evening. We grilled some fajitas over the campfire and watched the sky turn that crazy purple you only get out there. Around 9, the stars came out sharp as nails. That's half the reason we go. No light pollution, just the whole Milky Way right overhead. By 10, the kids were in their sleeping bags, out cold. Marlene and I sat by the fire, sipping from the flask I'd brought. It was quiet except for the crickets and the occasional distant yip of a coyote. You can hear forever out there. The air feels huge. It must have been close to midnight when I first noticed it. This low, steady sound, like a generator running far away. Not a plane, not a truck. It didn't waver or pulse, just this deep hum you could almost feel in your chest. At first, I thought maybe it was coming from some ranch equipment, but there weren't any ranches close enough for it to carry like that. Marlene heard it too. She gave me this look, like, "You hearing that?" I nodded, poked the fire a bit, trying not to make a big deal out of it. The sound wasn't moving, exactly, but it was getting thicker. That's the only way I can put it. Like it was pressing down on us. I leaned back in my chair to scan the sky. It was still bright with stars, the Big Dipper clear as day. But then, real slow, something changed. I couldn't see it at first, but the stars in one section of the sky seemed to vanish. Not all at once, just a few, then a few more, until there was this big starless patch overhead. It took a second to realize I was looking at something. Not a cloud. There weren't any clouds that night. This was darker than the sky, if that makes sense. A shape. Huge. No lights, no outline I could trace, just this absence of stars sliding over us. The hum got heavier as it passed right above. Marlene grabbed my arm, not hard, but she didn't let go. The kids were still asleep. I thought about waking them, but didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want them to see it. It moved so slow, I couldn't tell if it was even moving at all at first. No breeze, no change in the air except that pressure in my ears. I remember swallowing, trying to pop them like when you drive up to Cloudcroft, but it didn't work. The shape, whatever it was, covered the stars for what felt like a full minute, long enough for my eyes to start playing tricks. I thought I saw faint edges, maybe curved, maybe flat. I thought I saw parts of it shimmer, like heat waves over asphalt. Then the hum shifted down a tone, almost like it was farther away, and the stars began to reappear behind it. When it was gone, the sound faded too until all we could hear again were the crickets. I realized my hands were sweaty, even though the night had cooled off. Marlene didn't say anything for a while. Neither did I. We sat there, staring at the patch of sky where it had been. I kept trying to think of something normal it could have been. A low-flying cargo plane, some kind of blimp, maybe even a weird temperature inversion making a sound bounce funny. But none of that fit. No plane that size could move that slow without stalling, and blimps don't fly out here in the middle of the night with their lights off. A little while later, I decided to walk a bit away from the fire to see if I could hear it again. I didn't, but I did notice something odd. The dirt under my boots felt softer. Not everywhere, just in a rough oval about 30 feet across, maybe 50 yards from our tents. It wasn't wet, but it gave under my weight like it had been loosened. I knelt down and sifted some through my fingers. The top layer was warm, not warm from the day's heat. This was different. I stood there listening hard, half expecting the hum to come back. Nothing. No coyotes anymore either. Just the fire popping behind me. I didn't mention the warm dirt to Marlene. She was already on edge, and I didn't want to make the night worse. We sat up another half hour, then crawled into the tent. I kept my boots by the door, just in case. At some point I must have dozed off because I woke up to silence so complete it felt wrong. Even the bugs had shut up. Marlene was breathing slow beside me. I didn't hear the kids. I eased the zipper open just enough to peek out. The sky was normal again, full of stars. But the clearing felt empty, like the air had been scooped out. I stayed like that, half sitting, for maybe 10 minutes. Then I heard it, way off in the distance this time, the same low hum, fading even as I caught it. It didn't come back. By morning, everything looked ordinary. The soft patch of dirt had cooled, but was still looser than the rest. I kicked some dust over it and packed up our stuff. Marlene didn't bring up the noise or the missing stars until we were already halfway back to Midland. When she did, it was just one sentence. "You saw it too, right?" I told her yes. That was all we said about it. Name's Jesse Martin. I'm from a little town just outside Conroe, Texas, and I've been fishing Lake Livingston since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. It's the kind of place where you know the water, the trees, and every bend in the shore like the back of your hand. Most nights, I'm out there with my old boat, a beat-up bass boat my granddad handed down, and just the sound of the water and crickets for company. That's how I like it. This story starts on one of those quiet late summer nights a few months back. I'd taken the boat out around 9 p.m., figuring the crappie might bite better under the moonlight. The lake was calm, not a ripple, besides what the boat made cutting through the water. The sky was clear, stars spilling everywhere, and the heat of the day had finally eased off to a cool Texas kind of night. I'd set up near an old cypress stand about a mile from the North Shore, one of my favorite spots. I was sitting there, lines in the water, when I noticed something odd out in the middle of the lake. At first, I thought it was a boat with a spotlight. There's always folks out there, sometimes fishing late like me. But no, this was different. There were two pale beams of light, parallel, shining straight down from the sky onto the water. They weren't bright or harsh, more like a soft glow that lit up patches of the lake surface, as moving slowly but deliberate-like. They swept side to side, scanning the water back and forth, like someone was looking for something. The beams stayed about the same distance apart, maybe 10 or 15 feet, and moved together perfectly in sync. I swear there wasn't a single sound besides the gentle slap of water on the hull. No boat engines, no motor hum, just those lights. At first, I thought maybe it was a plane with searchlights, but I scanned the sky and didn't see anything. No wings, no flashing navigation lights, nothing. The beams came from way up, so high that I couldn't tell if it was a helicopter or a plane or something else entirely. I grabbed my phone to take a picture, but when I opened the camera, the screen just froze. The phone wouldn't work for a good 30 seconds. Then it started back up, like nothing happened. I checked the photos. Nothing of the beams, like they never showed up at all. The lights kept moving slowly, scanning that patch of lake for what felt like maybe 5 minutes. Then they began to fade. First one, then the other, until all that was left was the dark night and the water's quiet surface. I sat there, just staring. The whole thing didn't make sense. After a minute or two, I started the boat and headed back towards shore. But on the way, I felt like something was off. Like I was being watched. Though every time I looked around, it was just the lake and trees. Back at the dock, my buddy Ray was waiting. I told him about the lights, but he just shook his head and laughed it off, said maybe it was a reflection from a plane or a truck on the highway. Could be. But I know what I saw, and it didn't fit any normal explanation. That night, when I got home, I checked the news, local social media, anything. No reports of strange lights or planes in the area. Nothing. Since then, I've thought about that night more than a few times. The way those beams moved so precise, like some kind of search. The silence around it all. The frozen phone camera. I don't know if I want to say I saw something out of this world, but I do know it wasn't just a normal light show. Some nights, when I'm out on the lake, I find myself looking up hoping to see those pale beams again. Maybe to figure out what they were looking for. But the lake keeps its secrets, and for now, so do I. I pulled off Highway 67 onto the gravel shoulder by the little marathon station west of Brownwood because my rig was coughing and my phone said I had 3 bars and a job to call in. The neon over the pump hummed like a wasp and the night smelled like diesel and cut mesquite. I killed the engine, cracked the door for air, and then, because I always do, I checked my phone for messages. The screen read "No service" in big letters where the bars should have been. Name's Hank Lawson. I drive flatbed out of Abilene, and I was 2 runs into a 13-hour shift, tired enough to see mirages if the highway offered them. I shrugged it off and walked up to the pump. The card reader on the machine blinked. The numbers on the digital display were a little soft around the edges, like someone had smeared them with a greasy thumb. I thumbed at the keypad. "All right," I muttered, more to myself than to anything else. Behind the store, a dog started barking. Sharp, insistent. Then the barking stopped so fast it left everything in the air like a held note. The dog didn't pause. It cut off dead. You notice that. You notice sudden quiet in the country at night. The crickets down the embankment went mute too. The only thing left was the hum of the lights over the pumps and the distant thrum of tires on blacktop. I stood there with my hand on the pump handle and felt a small prickle run up my forearms. The glow over the parking lot changed. It wasn't brighter so much as whiter and softer, like the pale light you get inside a closed church when the sun hits a stained glass window just right. The whole sky above the station took on that white, the stars shrinking into pale pinpricks. No sound came with it. Air didn't shift. It just filled the lot. My phone didn't come back. The little clock in the corner of the screen still read 12:17. My wristwatch, old Timex, the thing that's been on my hand since before I had a mortgage, read 12:17 too. I told myself I'd been staring too long at displays and numbers. I sucked in a breath and tried to play it cool. I'd been out alone long enough to know when the road was trying to put something in your head. Then the truck behind me, a big double-axle dually, slowed to a stop on the other side of the pumps and idled. The driver's engine cut out and the cab went quiet. Somebody got out. I heard the thud of a boot and a curse. He called something, but it sounded like he was trying to talk through cotton. I called back, "You all right?" And my voice came out flat and small in the white light. He came around the back of the truck in a hurry, flashlight bobbing. "Phone's dead," he said, too bright-eyed. "Ain't nothing on the screen." He had that look people get when the world stops answering them, one of those looks I'll recognize later if you told me 10 years from now. We both stood in that white, and the pump's clock ticked like nothing had happened. The light hung there, like it had a shape we weren't seeing. My skin stayed the kind of cold you only get when you're trying to decide whether to keep moving. I tried the pump. The card reader flashed an error. The little LCD went blank for a breath and then spit back a number that didn't match the gallons I'd pumped. It said, I'd filled the rig when I knew I hadn't pumped a drop. I stepped back. The pump clicked like a clock and then stopped. The other driver, a kid not yet 40, shook his head and said, "You see that too?" He sounded nervous the way men who grew up on ranches sound when they're about to confess they're scared. We both looked up at the sky and I wished for the stupidest things. Rain, a cop car rolling by, a radio that would come back to life with some AM DJ's voice. Instead, the glow stretched a little lower, like someone had lowered a lampshade. It shone through the rig's windshield with the same soft white that shows faces wrong and honest at the same time. My truck's telemetry screen, the one clipped under the dash that tells me RPM and temp and the like, blinked and then came back with nonsense numbers. The tack read 0 though, the keys were in my hand. The console clock flicked from 12:12:17 to 12:36 and then back to 12:18 like it wasn't sure what to do. It wasn't a dramatic effect. Nothing crashed, no buildings lit up, no thunder rolled. It was more like the world misplacing a page in a book and then finding it again. The dog barked a time or two, quieter now, then folded back to sleep. A tractor way off in a field coughed once and went still. That quiet became a pressure, sitting against my ears. We waited. The kid next to me started to joke about failing satellites and space junk because jokes are easier than other things, but his laugh sounded thin. I kept checking my phone and then my Timex, and both clocks held little differences like a lie. My phone stuck at 12:17, and the watch wavered into 12:36 for a breath, then snapped back like a rubber band. Finally, the glow thinned at the edges and pulled up and away like fog. The sky slid back to its regular black with its usual handful of stars. The neon over the pumps blinked like nothing had happened. My phone breathed life, and the network bars crawled back along the top of the screen. The kid's voice on the other side of the pump was sudden and bright. "Hey, did y'all just..." I checked the pump again. The total matched the gallons this time. The numbers lined up, the receipt printed, and I stuck it in my pocket, like paper that might be evidence. The kid walked to his rig, tested his radio, and then started up with a cough that made the dust dance. He waved at me, slow, the way people wave when the wind comes back. I got back into my truck and pulled the keys to my knee to start the engine. The dash clock read 12:38. My Timex read 12:17. My phone, blinking with 3 bars and messages stacking, showed a text timestamp from dispatch at 12:37 that I couldn't remember getting. My receipt said I'd filled at 12:18. I sat with my head between my hands for a long second. I don't chase ghosts. I don't write to papers or think in terms of things from a science fiction channel. I write logs and keep receipts and sleep when I can. But I also knew how long it took to drive the next stretch of highway empty and how long it took my rig to idle. 20 minutes is long enough to cross a county. It's long enough for a country boy to wake up to a calf being born. It's long enough for a person to get somewhere and be gone. I drove off feeling the rig heavier than usual, like the load inside had decided to take a nap. I called dispatch when I hit the blacktop. The operator's voice came through like it had always been there. "You good, Hank? You missed the check-in." I told her I'd been delayed at a pump. She asked for the receipt number, then said calmly, "You logged 20 minutes late on that last check, Hank. You sure you didn't stop somewhere else?" Her voice was flat, professional. I told her I was by the Brownwood pump. She put me on hold for a second and then came back. "No one else has reported outages." She didn't say it like it surprised her. By the time I pulled back onto the highway, the sky had the cold look of a bad night over West Texas, indifferent and clean. The Timex still ticked at 12:17 like a stubborn thing. My phone kept loading texts like it had been backed up with a tide. An hour later, my watch and my phone matched, and my dispatch log showed I'd been offline for 20 minutes. I could hand the receipt to anyone, and it would say one thing, and the clock on the dash would say another. My brain tried to file it away under tired, under static, under wiring in the marsh. It didn't want to pick any of them. I told my buddy at the yard the next day. He nodded and said, "That whole stretch has got weird power lines, don't it?" He laughed a little too loudly. I filed the conversation behind a handful of other strange runs I've had. Mirrors on the side of the road that didn't look like anything you'd see. A fog that smelled faintly of metal. I kept the receipt in my logbook, folded 3 times, and when I crossed that part of the highway, now I find myself scanning the sky before I stop, like I might catch the air before it rearranges itself again. Sure, here's the story, exactly as requested. Name's Travis Elkins. Grew up around Zanesville, but I moved out to Columbus a while back for work. This happened 2 summers ago when I took a weekend to camp out near Salt Fork. I'd been there a handful of times as a kid with my uncle, so I figured it'd be nice to get away from everything for a couple nights. No phone, no meetings, no concrete, just quiet. I went alone, packed up my little Coleman tent, a cooler, my hiking boots, a couple meals I could heat over the fire, and headed out Friday morning. I got there by late afternoon and hiked about 2 miles off the main trail to a small clearing I remembered from before. Nothing fancy, just a soft patch of ground with some tree cover and a small stream nearby. Real peaceful. The first night was uneventful. I ate, cracked a beer, and sat by the fire watching the trees sway. There was a little rustling in the brush after dark, but that's normal. Raccoons, probably. I slept okay. It was the second night when things got weird. I turned in around 10. Didn't feel tired, just bored, I guess. The woods were dead quiet, more than usual. No bugs chirping, which struck me now that I think about it. Just that kind of stillness that makes your ears feel like they're ringing, even when they're not. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. No idea what time it was at that point. No phone, just my wristwatch. It was pitch dark. No moon, no fire left. My tent was zipped, and nothing felt wrong exactly, just off. That kind of feeling where your body wakes up before your mind knows why. I lay there for a minute, listening. I didn't hear anything. Not the stream, not a single branch creaking, just dead silence. That's when I noticed my watch. I keep it strapped on while I sleep, face inward. I rolled over to look at it, clicked the button to light it up. 2:38 a.m. I rolled back over, figuring maybe I just had a weird dream or something. But then I realized the zipper on my tent door wasn't where I left it. I always zip it all the way to the bottom corner when I close up for the night, so there's no draft. But now it was up along the side, maybe a quarter open. I sat up real slow, shined my little headlamp toward the zipper. Nothing. I didn't hear anything still. Just the kind of quiet that starts to press on your chest after a while. I opened the flap and looked outside. Everything, and I mean everything, from my sight was outside the tent. My pack, boots, flashlight, cooler, cooking pot, folding chair, even the damn trash bag. All laid out in a perfect grid, maybe 4 feet between each item, just sitting there on the ground like someone had inventoried them. My sleeping bag and pillow were the only things still inside with me. I stood there in the doorway, light swinging back and forth between each object. There were no footprints in the dirt, no drag marks. The ground was soft enough that I should have seen something. Raccoon prints, boot treads, something. But it was just smooth, pressed down grass and a few scattered pine needles. At first, I thought maybe I'd gotten up during the night and done it myself, sleepwalking, but I've never done anything like that before. Plus, the layout was each thing set parallel, facing the same direction. My socks were folded and set beside my boots. The lid of the cooler was propped open with a stick, like it was being displayed. I circled the site, still no noise from the woods, no breeze. Even the stream sounded like it had stopped. Then I checked my watch again, 2:49. I remember that clearly because the light didn't work at first, like the battery had died, but then it flicked on again. 11 minutes had passed since I first woke up. But I didn't feel like I'd done anything for those 11 minutes. I checked the zipper, looked out, scanned the site, and walked maybe 2 circles. That couldn't have taken more than 2 or 3 minutes. I know time feels weird in the dark, but I swear I lost something there. I packed up right then. Didn't even bother trying to make sense of it. Stuffed everything back into the pack. Shoved loose items in wherever they'd fit. I left the trash bag tied to a branch. Figured I'd come back later, but I never did. I hiked out with my flashlight on full beam. Took the trail back to the car with the light bouncing all over, not even caring if I made noise. Didn't pass anyone, didn't hear a single sound. Not an owl, not a twig snap. Made it back to the car a little after 4. Sat in the driver's seat for a while with the door locked, staring at the woods. I checked the watch again. Still ticking, still lit up fine. Said 4:12. But here's the weirdest part. Later that morning, I emptied my backpack on the kitchen floor back in Columbus. And at the very bottom, buried under my spare shirt and trail mix bag, was a pine cone. A big, fat, green pine cone, still sticky with sap. I don't remember picking one up. I definitely didn't pack one. But there it was, sitting dead center like it had been placed there carefully. None of my stuff was missing. But the folding knife I'd brought, the one I'd set next to my chair when I went to sleep, was completely clean, like factory clean. No grime, no fingerprints. Even the little bit of sap that had been stuck near the hinge was gone. I'd used it the night before to cut open a package of jerky, and I remember thinking I needed to clean it later. But it was spotless, shiny. I still don't have a clue what happened that night. I didn't tell anybody about it for months, not even my cousin who camps with his kids out there all the time. I kept thinking maybe I'd find a logical answer, like maybe I had sleepwalked or a prankster came through, but nothing fits. There were no animal tracks, no signs of another person. The gear was arranged too carefully to be random, and that weird, quiet, heavy air, it didn't feel natural. I haven't been back to Salt Fork since. I still camp sometimes, but only at state sites with neighbors. And I check my watch every few hours, even if I'm not awake, just in case. I was driving home from a long day at the plant in Chillicothe, just the usual grind, you know? It was late August, so the sun was already dipping low, casting that warm orange glow across the fields. I was on State Route 35, heading out of town toward my place on the edge of Ross County. My wife Lisa was with me. We were both quiet after the day, just soaking in the slow fade of daylight through the window. I remember passing that big cornfield just past the edge of town, the one by the old Miller farm. Usually, it's just rows and rows of tall green stalks swaying with the breeze, nothing out of the ordinary. But this time, something caught my eye. Up above the field, about 30, maybe 40 feet off the ground, there was this shape. It was black as pitch, and it didn't look like any drone or helicopter I'd ever seen. No blinking lights, no noise, no rotors spinning, just a solid, matte black form hanging there perfectly still like it was watching the field. I slowed down the truck and nudged the wheel to the shoulder. Lisa looked at me, her eyes narrowing, but she didn't say anything. I don't think either of us could figure out what we were looking at. The sun had just gone behind the trees, so it was dim, but not dark yet. The shape stood out against the deepening sky, like a shadow detached from anything. We both stepped out, the evening air cooler than I expected, with this sudden chill that made my neck hairs stand up. There wasn't a sound except for a faint rustle of corn leaves moving. The weird part was, the air felt different. Heavier somehow, and quiet like everything else had been muted. Lisa shivered and wrapped her arms around herself. I pulled my phone out, but my screen was fogged over and the signal dropped to 0 bars. Figured maybe it was just dead, or the trees were messing with it. I tried snapping a picture anyway, but every time I pointed the camera at that shape, the screen went black. Then I noticed the corn below it. That's when my stomach dropped. The stalks weren't just bent or pressed down from wind or rain. They were flattened in a perfect spiral, tight and uniform, circling out from right beneath the shape. I've seen plenty of crop damage before from storms and farmers walking fields, but nothing like this. The stalks were smashed flat, almost as if someone had stepped in a circle over and over, but no footprints or tire tracks anywhere near. Lisa and I looked at each other, and I swear the silence got heavier. I couldn't hear the crickets, no birds calling, nothing except this unnatural hush. The shape stayed still, like it was watching us, but with no eyes or lights. Then, after maybe a minute or two that felt like hours, it slowly drifted backwards over the field without a sound, like it was gliding on air. I got back in the truck, still staring at that black form as it moved away from the road, going deeper over the cornfield. It just vanished behind the trees on the far side. No trail, no glow, no flicker. Just gone. We drove home slow, both of us quiet, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, I kept thinking about that spiral in the corn. How perfect it was. How unnatural. The next day, I drove by again in daylight, but the field looked normal. The stalks were upright, no sign of any damage. I asked around, but no one else seemed to notice anything unusual. The strangest part was how calm everything seemed afterward, like the whole town was pretending nothing had happened. But I know what I saw. I don't have answers. Just that shape hanging there, the cold air, and the corn laid flat in a perfect circle. It stayed with me. This quiet, heavy feeling like something was watching, waiting, and then disappeared without a trace. I worked the late shift as a janitor at one of the high schools out in Dayton, Fairview High, if you know it. It's the kind of job where you pretty much have the place to yourself once the last class lets out, and the whole building feels empty, quiet, and sometimes a little too still. The kind of quiet that makes you notice every creak and groan of the old building settling. This one night, I was finishing up by the gym, mopping the floor near the locker rooms, when I started hearing this low, steady humming sound. At first, I thought it was just the air conditioning or maybe the old pipes humming through the walls, but it didn't quite fit the usual noises. It was more persistent and kind of unnatural. Not loud enough to be annoying, but enough to make me stop and listen. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to step outside for a bit to get some air. It was late October, so the air was crisp and the playground lights were off except for that one old street lamp near the entrance, flickering on and off like it was about to give out. I figured the humming might be easier to track outside. As soon as I stepped out the door, the humming got clearer, and that's when I saw it. Floating just above the ground near the far edge of the playground, by the swings, this pale, glowing orb. It was maybe the size of a basketball, but it didn't shine like a regular light bulb or anything. It was more like a soft, pulsing glow, with colors shifting just a little from a dull white to something almost bluish. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things at first. I blinked a couple of times and rubbed my eyes, but the thing was definitely there, hovering maybe 3 feet off the ground, just swaying slightly in place like it was suspended on a breeze. The school's yard was dead quiet except for the hum, and there wasn't a single other person around. I felt my stomach tighten, the way you do when something's not right but you can't say what. My first thought was to call someone, maybe maintenance or the principal, but my phone was dead, no bars at all, which isn't unusual on that side of the building. Instead, I took a cautious step closer, keeping my flashlight aimed at the orb. The closer I got, the more the humming seemed to fill the air, like it was vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. The orb flickered once, like it was reacting to me, then suddenly blinked out. Just like that, gone. I stood there blinking, expecting maybe it would come back, but nothing. Just the quiet night and that faint smell of ozone that seemed to hang in the air where the orb had been. You know that sharp, clean smell, kind of like when there's a storm coming or after a lightning strike? That's exactly what it was. I felt kind of dumb standing there, staring at empty air, so I turned back toward the school. As I walked back, I noticed the humming was still there, but much fainter, almost like a whisper, fading with every step. Back inside, everything was normal, the old building creaking and groaning like usual. I checked the security cameras near the playground on my phone. No sign of anything strange, just empty swings and shadows. Nobody reported hearing or seeing anything unusual, not that I'd expect them to in the middle of the night. I told the night supervisor about it the next day, and he laughed it off, said I probably just saw some kind of reflection or drone. I wasn't so sure. It wasn't a drone. No blinking lights, no sound of rotors, and the way it moved wasn't mechanical. Over the next few nights, I kept an ear out for that humming again. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a faint glow near the playground, but it never stayed long, and I never got close enough to see more. Animals around the schoolyard seemed skittish too. Cats and raccoons avoided the area, and birds kept flying off whenever I got near. The whole thing stuck with me because it felt like something watching, or maybe waiting. I don't know what it was or why it came around the school, but whatever it was, it left an impression. Nothing dramatic, no flashing lights or beams, just that slow, steady hum, the pale glow, and that strange ozone smell hanging in the night air. I was camping out near Malabar Farm State Park, just outside of Lucas, for a weekend to get some space from the dorms and everything going on with classes. Figured a little solo trip would clear my head, nature and all that. I set up my tent on a small clearing off one of the lesser used trails, not too far from the main road, but tucked enough that I thought no one would bother me. I'd been out there maybe 6 or 7 hours before I crashed for the night. I remember waking up feeling off. Like everything was just wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on why at first. It was around 3 in the morning, though I didn't know the time until later. When I sat up, the air was colder than I expected, even though it was late spring. The tent walls were kind of damp, and I could smell the earth, fresh and wet from earlier rain. The moon was out, just enough light filtering through the trees to see shadows and shapes. The weird part was how dizzy I felt when I stood up, like the world was tilting slightly, but there was no reason for it. I stepped outside the tent and my foot hit mud. I looked down and saw footprints, big ones, circling the tent. Not just one circle, but 2 or 3 overlapping rings. They looked fresh, like someone or something had been pacing around all night. I froze for a minute, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it, but the prints were real, no doubt about it. They were too big for me, maybe close to a size 12 or bigger. Muddy but not sloppy, like whoever made them was careful. Then I reached for my watch on my wrist, and it wasn't there. I always wore it camping. It was the only clock I had. I checked the tent floor, my backpack, pockets, nothing. Feeling a little freaked out, I grabbed my phone, but the battery was dead, which was weird because I'd charged it fully before I left. I guess I hadn't realized how long I'd been out there, or how little signal I'd get in that area. As I shone my flashlight around, something else caught my eye. About 20 feet from the tent, on the trunk of a big oak tree, were shallow scratch marks carved into the bark. At first, I thought they were random, but as I stepped closer, I noticed the scratches formed a spiral pattern. It wasn't natural. The marks were jagged but deliberate, like someone had taken a knife or a sharp stick and carefully made that shape. I circled the tree, shining the light all around, looking for more marks. There were smaller spirals on some of the nearby trees, all within maybe 50 feet of the tent. The bark looked freshly torn, still raw and light-colored under the dark outer layer. That's when my head really started spinning a little, and I realized I couldn't remember exactly how I got to that clearing. The trail I took, I had a fuzzy image in my mind, but it was hazy, like a dream I was only half awake for. I backtracked from the tent, following the muddy footprints that ran out into the woods in a loose loop before disappearing into thicker brush. The prints weren't deep, but they were there, and they didn't look like anything I'd ever seen, at least not human. I felt like I was being watched. But whenever I spun around, all I could see were trees and shadows. No sounds except for the wind rustling the leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. I didn't want to stay out there any longer than I had to. I packed up as fast as I could, but the unease didn't leave me. Before leaving, I took one last look at the trees with the spiral scratches, and that pattern just stuck with me, the strange, deliberate rhythm of it. On the way back to my car, I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling the same tight knot in my stomach I'd felt since waking. When I finally made it to the parking lot, it was nearly dawn. My legs were sore from the hike back, and the morning sun felt too bright after the night. I still don't know what happened out there. The muddy footprints, the missing watch, the scratch marks, they don't add up. I told a couple of friends, but they laughed it off, said maybe some drunk camper or animals or my imagination, but I'm certain about what I saw. Something was there in the dark near my tent, circling, watching, and those spirals in the trees weren't natural at all. I've been back a few times since, but I don't camp out near that clearing anymore. I still think about it sometimes when I'm walking through campus, how something so quiet and slow could feel so wrong. I drove long haul for about 15 years. mostly east-west routes, Ohio to California or up into Washington when the weather was good. This happened in late March 2018, somewhere in Nebraska. I was hauling fertilizer out of Sioux City and headed down toward Colorado Springs. Route 83 most of the way. Not much out there except empty land and the occasional gas station with bad coffee. That stretch between North Platte and McCook is about as remote as it gets. Flat, long, dead quiet. No radio stations, barely any traffic. If you break down out there, you wait. I'd taken that route dozens of times before. But around mile marker 211, just past 9 p.m., I started hearing this sound on the CB. I wasn't talking to anyone, just had it on, like I always do. The volume was low, but I noticed this clicking. Mechanical, fast, almost like a typewriter. Not Morse code, not static. Just click, 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 evenly spaced, like something cycling. I turned the squelch knob up and down. Didn't help. It wasn't on channel 19 either. It didn't matter what channel I switched to, it stayed there. Low, just under everything, like it was embedded in the signal somehow. I figured it was bleed through from some tower nearby, though I couldn't see anything around me. Just fields and a barbed wire fence under a clear sky. I was between markers 211 and 212 when I noticed something else. One of the stars wasn't staying still. At first I thought it was my windshield. I tapped it, nothing. Wiped the inside, still there. Every time the clicking sound hit a certain rhythm, 3 fast, 1 slow, that particular star would twitch slightly to the left, barely noticeable. Maybe an inch if you held your hand out, then it would stay put, like it was repositioning. That sequence repeated about every 40 seconds. I killed the CB completely. The clicking stopped, but the star still moved. I watched it while driving 65. It didn't blink like the others, just sat there, sharp and white, until the rhythm hit again. Then another small shift. Left. Pause. Nothing. I passed marker 213 and the star stopped moving. The rest of the sky looked normal again. I turned the CB back on. Quiet. Just the usual background hiss. Next night, I came back up the same stretch, northbound this time. I was curious and I'll admit a little on edge. Around 9:20 p.m., I hit marker 213 again. A couple minutes later, passing 212, the clicking started. It was the exact same pattern. I slowed to 55 and leaned forward to look up through the windshield. That same bright point was there, just above the horizon ahead. Still. Then the clicking hit the sequence. 3 fast, 1 slow. The star shifted. Same direction. Left. Just a little. I tried talking on the CB, asked if anyone else was nearby, if they were hearing what I was. No answer. Didn't even get feedback. That was weird, because usually I'd get some squelch bounce even if nobody replied. Once I crossed 211, it stopped again. Clicking gone. Star held steady. I started timing it. Third night, I made a point of passing through around the same time. It was windy that night. You could see the grain in the fields rippling under the moonlight. When I got between 211 and 213, everything dropped quiet, like the wind cut off. That part freaked me out more than anything. No sound from the rig, no vibration from the road, just silence and those damn clicks. That night, I noticed something else. When the star shifted, my interior dome light flickered. Just once, a little pulse, like a voltage dip. Didn't affect anything else, gauges were steady, engine didn't hiccup, but the light definitely dimmed for a second. I kept both hands on the wheel and didn't touch the CB. The clicking carried on, soft and steady. It felt like something was checking in. That's the only way I can describe it, like a scheduled event. I drove through that stretch another 4 times in the next month. It happened every single time, only between mile markers 211 and 213, and only between 9:10 and 9:40 p.m. Never outside that window. I tried pulling over once, right at 212. Sat there idling with the CB on. The clicking got louder the longer I stayed. Not in volume, just in presence, like it was getting closer to the front of my brain. The star moved again. Then it kind of pulsed. Not a blink. It got slightly brighter for about half a second. The dome light flickered with it. Then I got the smell, like hot copper and ozone. I've only ever smelled that once before, after an inverter fried in an old cab. I threw it in gear and kept driving. I stopped taking that route for a while. Even when dispatch asked, I said I preferred going west through Ogallala. Cost me a few hours, but I didn't care. Last time I drove that section was in January 2020, right before I quit the road. Snow on the shoulders, full moon night, sky clear again. I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing. Then, around 9:15, the CB popped once. No clicking, just a pop. Then silence. Not static, silence. I looked up. The star was there, but this time it was already shifted, like it had been watching ahead of schedule. I was hiking alone one morning in late spring out near Black Canyon, which is a few hours west of Denver. It's not super remote, but it's definitely quiet and rugged enough that you don't see many people on weekday mornings. I was doing a loop trail that runs along the bottom of the canyon, following the creek for a while, then climbing up to some overlook points before heading back. The day started normal. Overcast sky, cool air, damp smell from the creek. I'd been out maybe an hour, just pacing myself, watching the trail, listening for birds and the rush of water. It's the kind of place where you expect to hear things, birds chirping, bugs buzzing, the wind rustling through the scrub. But after maybe 20 minutes, I noticed something weird. My footsteps, the crunch of my boots on gravel and dry leaves, sounded wrong. Not quiet exactly, but like they weren't carrying at all. I stopped and looked around. Usually the canyon walls bounce sound back so that even a soft step echoes. But this time there was nothing. No echo, just dead silence. I lifted a rock with my trekking pole, let it drop to the ground. No sound, not even a faint tap. I blinked, thinking maybe my ears were blocked or I was imagining it. I tried clapping my hands, cupped over my ears. The sound was muted, like underwater, not muffled or distant, but like the whole world had turned down its volume. I took a deep breath and noticed even my own breathing sounded weird, like the air was thicker or my ears weren't registering it properly. It was quieter and dull, like breathing through a scarf, but I had nothing over my face. Then I realized the birds overhead were circling, but silent. I looked up and saw at least 4 or 5 of them, big black ravens, usually loud and cawing, just gliding on the wind with no sound. They weren't startled or reacting to me, just circling like statues in the sky. The wind wasn't blowing much, but the trees were perfectly still, no rustle, no creak. Even the creek's running water sounded like a faint murmur, barely there, like the whole canyon was in a kind of soundless bubble. I stopped walking and just stood there for a minute, trying to process what was going on. It was eerie. Not the creepy kind, just wrong. I took a few more steps forward, testing it. No echo, no footsteps, no real sound at all from anything around me. It felt like the world had paused, like I'd fallen into some quiet dream. After maybe 10 minutes of this, I started to feel a bit uneasy. I turned around slowly, scanning the cliffs and trees. No movement except the birds, still gliding silently. No people, no animals. Just me. Then I bent down to examine the trail where the gravel met dirt. I was looking at a patch of loose stones when my foot caught on a root hidden under the leaves. I tripped and fell forward, scraping my right knee against a jagged rock. As soon as I hit the ground, everything came rushing back at once. The sharp pain, the sound of my scrape against the rock, my quick breath, the distant caw of a raven finally breaking the silence. It was like someone hit a switch. Suddenly I could hear the wind again, the creek babbling louder, leaves rustling. The birds took off, calling to each other, their caws echoing against the cliffs. I sat there for a minute, stunned. My knee was bleeding and stinging, but the noise was overwhelming after that silence. It felt like the world was breathing again. I stood up slowly and rubbed at my knee, still looking around. Everything seemed normal, except the weird silence from before. I tried walking back toward the trailhead. My steps sounded fine, echoing off the canyon walls like they always had. The birds were noisy and active again, like nothing had happened. But that silence stayed with me, like a thin shadow under the usual sounds. I kept thinking about it on the way home. No echo, no footsteps, no breathing sound. Silent birds circling but not making a peep. And then that sudden snap back to normal with my fall. I've hiked that canyon a few times since then. Nothing like that happened again. No weird silences. No mute birds. I don't know if it was something natural or something else. But for those 15 minutes, the world was quiet in a way I can't explain. It was like the canyon was holding its breath, and then it let go. I was out hiking alone on a Sunday afternoon in early October. I like to get away from the city on weekends, and I had found this trail a few months earlier while browsing some old topo maps online. It was a backcountry route in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, not super popular or well marked, which was exactly why I wanted to try it. Quiet, fewer people, more nature. I started the hike around 2 p.m. The weather was cool but clear, typical fall day, some clouds but mostly sun. The trees were just starting to turn, reds and yellows mixed with the evergreens. I had my day pack with the usual water, snacks, map, compass, and a phone with spotty reception. The trail itself was a narrow dirt path winding through the forest, marked occasionally with orange paint blazes on trees and a few weathered wooden signs nailed here and there. I'd been hiking for maybe 2 hours, enjoying the quiet and the crunch of leaves underfoot. The trail climbed steadily, but nothing too tough. I stopped for a break at a clearing with a small view of the valley below. I pulled out my map and checked where I was, figuring I was about halfway to the end. I put the map away, glanced up, and that's when things started feeling off. The trail markers I'd been following, the orange blazes on trees, were gone. Not just missing or faded, but completely gone. I looked around and couldn't find any trace of the dirt path either. The ground where I'd been walking was covered in leaves, but there were no footprints, no scuff marks, nothing disturbed. It was like the trail never existed. At first, I thought maybe I'd wandered off the trail without realizing it, but that didn't make sense. The path was obvious and narrow, and I'd been watching carefully. I stepped back and forth a few times, trying to find any sign of it, but there was nothing. Trees and underbrush all around, but no trail. Then I heard it, a low humming sound. It wasn't loud, more like a vibration in the air, almost beneath hearing, but definitely there. It felt like the kind of noise you get near heavy electrical equipment, but obviously there was nothing like that out here. The forest was silent except for that. I stood still for a few minutes, trying to listen, trying to make sense of what was happening. The humming seemed to pulse slightly, almost like a heartbeat or a slow engine idling. The longer I stood, the more uneasy I felt. My skin got goosebumps even though the air wasn't cold. Suddenly, like a switch flipped, the humming stopped. The trail reappeared. The orange blazes were back on the trees, the dirt path was clear, and the footprints I'd left earlier were visible again in the dirt. It was as if none of that had ever disappeared. I looked around to see if anything else had changed, but everything else looked the same. Trees, rocks, sky. I stood there for a minute, wondering if I had just imagined the whole thing. But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I kept hiking, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was different. The forest felt heavier somehow, like it was watching. The usual sounds, birds, wind in the leaves, were quieter. Even when I reached spots where I'd heard birds before, they were silent. When I got back to my car a few hours later, I checked the timestamps on the photos I'd taken on the trail. Nothing was missing, no weird gaps in time. But my watch was off by a few minutes, even though I hadn't touched it since leaving. I shrugged it off and drove home. I've been back on that trail a couple times since, but I haven't experienced anything like that again. Still, that moment when everything vanished and the humming filled the air, I can't explain it. I was hiking alone on the Blue Ridge Trail late one September afternoon, just after lunch. It was one of those days where the air felt a little heavier than usual, humid, but with a cool breeze coming through the trees. I'd left my car at the trailhead around noon and had been walking steadily for about 2 hours. The forest was quiet except for birds and the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. I remember stopping at a small clearing to take a break and have some water. The spot was shaded by tall oaks and the sun made dappled patterns on the ground. I sat down, leaned my back against a tree, and took a few sips from my water bottle. My backpack was beside me, resting on a patch of grass that looked soft and undisturbed. That's where the memory gets fuzzy. The next thing I knew, I was standing near the edge of the trail, about a quarter mile from the clearing. I looked at my watch, confused because the time didn't add up. It was almost an hour later than when I had sat down to rest. I had no idea what had happened during that time. I checked my phone to see if I'd missed any calls or messages, but there was nothing unusual. No dropped calls, no GPS locations that jumped ahead. I hadn't taken a picture or made a note. It was like I just lost that chunk of time. My heart started pounding when I realized I had no memory of walking from the clearing to that spot. I wasn't sure if I'd fallen asleep or if something else had happened. I decided to go back to the clearing to see if anything looked different. When I got there, my backpack wasn't where I remembered leaving it. It had been moved maybe 3 or 4 feet away, resting near a freshly crushed patch of grass. The ground looked flattened, like something heavy had been pressing down on it, but there were no footprints or signs of anyone else being there. I checked the grass carefully. No tire marks, no shoe prints, just the crushed vegetation. I felt a faint metallic smell in the air. It wasn't like the scent of rusty metal or anything sharp, but more like the smell of old machinery or electronics. Hard to describe, but definitely not a natural forest smell. I looked around, trying to figure out if there was a source for the smell, but all I saw were trees and underbrush. The woods were still quiet, too quiet maybe. I tried calling out, just in case someone was nearby, but there was no answer. I felt my skin crawl. I checked my backpack carefully. Nothing was missing. My phone, water, snacks, first aid kit, all exactly where I'd packed them. But the zipper was open, and the contents looked slightly disorganized, as if someone had rifled through it quickly, but then replaced everything. I sat down on the crushed grass patch, trying to think. Had I fallen? Hit my head? But there were no bruises or scrapes, nothing that would explain the memory loss. I decided to keep walking, heading back toward my car, but I stayed extra alert, eyes scanning the shadows. I felt like I was being watched, even though the forest looked empty. The sun started setting as I made my way down the trail. At one point, I thought I heard a low hum, like electricity, but when I stopped to listen, it vanished. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. When I got to my car, I locked the doors and sat inside for a long time before driving away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that empty clearing, the moved backpack, and the smell. I looked up the trail cameras in the area, but none were near the spot where I'd stopped. I checked online for reports of missing hikers or strange sightings, but found nothing. I went back the next weekend with a friend, retraced the trail to the clearing. The grass was flattened again, exactly where I'd seen it, but no backpack this time. I didn't bring my own backpack or anything else. I just wanted to see the place again. We didn't hear or see anything strange, but the feeling was still there, the heavy quiet, the metallic scent faint in the air. I'm not sure what happened that day. The time loss, the moved backpack, the smell. It doesn't make sense. I keep going back to the trail now, but I don't hike alone anymore. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can almost feel that heaviness again, like something was there watching. But I don't know what. Name's Jake Mallory. I've been running snowmobiles across the tundra around Bethel for a good chunk of my life, hauling gear, checking traps, that sort of thing. Nothing fancy, just the usual work that keeps folks going through those long winters. I'm not one for stories or tall tale tales, but what happened last January still sits with me, and I've been trying to make sense of it ever since. It was a clear night, bone cold, probably 20 below. The kind where the stars burn sharp and the air snaps in your lungs like glass. I was coming back from a run near the Kuskokwim River, cutting across the flat tundra to shave off some time. The snow was hard-packed from the freeze, perfect for riding fast, and I was making good time under the glow of the moon. I'd been watching the sky a bit that night, more out of habit than anything. Up there, past the usual constellations, the stars looked endless. That's when I noticed something strange on the horizon, a cluster of lights, bright but not like any plane or helicopter I'd ever seen. They were blinking in a way that seemed deliberate, almost mechanical, and arranged in a precise shape, like a perfect triangle, but with smaller points inside, almost like a grid. I'm not good with geometry, but it was too perfect to be random. I slowed down to get a better look, heart thumping. The lights didn't move or make a sound, just hovered silently, steady as a rock against the cold night sky. The snowmobile's engine was the only noise, and even that felt distant, like the world had muffled everything else around me. I pulled my phone out, figuring I'd try to get a photo, not that I expected much in the dark with my old camera. As I aimed, the lights vanished in an instant. Just like that. No fade, no blink off, nothing. Gone. The sky was empty, just stars again. I sat there on the sled, blinking. No lights, no noise, nothing but the cold biting at my face and the wind whispering over the snow. Then I caught it, a faint smell, something sharp and electric, like ozone mixed with burnt wood or scorched earth. I looked around, but the ground was frozen solid, no scorch marks, no smoke, just the usual tundra. I didn't know what to make of it. The smell hung in the air for a moment, then faded with the wind. I started the snowmobile again and headed back slow, looking over my shoulder every now and then, half expecting to see those lights come back. They didn't. The next few days, I kept thinking about what I'd seen. When I told a couple of friends at the general store in Bethel, they laughed it off. Probably some military drills, one said. Another guessed it was just satellites or airplanes. Maybe. But none of that explained the smell or how fast the lights disappeared. No commercial planes fly slow and silent like that, especially not in that pattern. On my way out for another run a few nights later, I took a different route to check for any signs on the ground near where the lights had been. Snow was untouched, no tracks or burns. The only thing different was the way the air felt, thicker, heavier, like the cold had weight to it. I kept looking for any flicker or glow, but the sky was just normal stars and moonlight. That night, as I headed home, I noticed the radio on my sled was acting up, static popping in and out, cutting through my favorite station. At one point, I swear I heard a faint pulse, almost like a Morse code, but it didn't make any sense. I figured maybe the cold was messing with the electronics. After that, things got stranger. On a couple of rides, I'd get this feeling like I was being watched, not by people or animals, but something else. When I stopped to check the engine or tie down gear, I'd glance around, but nothing was there. Just the endless white tundra and the frozen horizon. One night, I caught a flicker of movement out there, just beyond the tree line where the river bends, a glint of light that wasn't fire or flashlight. It was like something reflecting the moon but moving too smoothly, almost floating. I tightened my jacket and kept going, heart in my throat. After that, I started carrying a little extra gear, a flare gun, a handheld GPS, even a small digital recorder, just in case. Nothing showed up on the recorder, though. No voices, no strange sounds, just my own breathing and the snowmobile's hum. Weeks passed with no new sightings. The weather turned warmer, snow softened, and the tundra started to thaw. The weird smells and the humming vanished. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it gets out there. Still, sometimes when I'm alone out on the snow, especially on a quiet, clear night, I swear I see a flicker of blinking lights on the horizon. Never the same pattern twice, just a glimpse before they vanish. And sometimes that smell comes back on the wind, faint and electric. I don't know what it was or if anyone else will ever see it. But out there, under the endless Alaskan sky, some things don't quite fit the rules. And sometimes you catch a glimpse of them just before they disappear. It started out as just another late winter snowshoe trip in the Wrangell Mountains. I'd been itching to get out for a couple days, away from the noise of town and the usual grind, so I packed light and headed up a side trail I hadn't been on before. Name's Jessa Cole, born and raised in Glenallen, so I'm no stranger to the backcountry. Snowshoeing this time of year is a pain sometimes. Deep snow, bone-chilling wind, but that's part of the deal if you want to feel like you're alone. The air was crisp, just below zero, with a steady breeze coming off the Chitina River Valley. I was maybe 3 miles from the highway, wandering where the trees started to thin out and the mountains loomed a bit closer. The sky was overcast, low clouds pressing down on the peaks, making everything feel quieter, heavier somehow. I was moving slow, boots crunching the crusted snow, when I spotted something odd through the trees. It looked like a small clearing, maybe 20 feet across, but what caught me was how perfectly round it was. Circular patches in the forest aren't unheard of, maybe a place where a tree fell or some animal's den, but this one was too precise, like someone took a giant cookie cutter and punched it out. Curious, I pushed closer, and found the center of the clearing was a patch of ice, crystal clear and glassy, with no snow on it, which was strange enough. But the weirdest part was the way pine needles were arranged all around the ice, pointing straight out from the circle like spokes on a wheel. Not scattered randomly, not piled by the wind, but carefully aligned outward in neat little rows. I knelt down, brushing snow off one of the pine needles. It felt dry, brittle, but the air right above the ice was different. Warmer. Not hot, just noticeably warmer than the freezing temperatures around. I held my hand close, and even though frost clung to the branches nearby, the patch of air right there felt like it was holding on to a faint heat. I stood up and listened. At first, it was just the usual creaks and groans of the forest settling in winter, but then I caught it, a low, almost imperceptible humming. Not like an engine or an animal, more like the vibration of a tuning fork or a distant power line, but quieter. I had to lean in close to hear it. I looked around to see if there was something I was missing, maybe a generator or radio tower, but nothing. Just trees, snow, and that weird little circle. I tried to keep it together. Thought maybe it was my brain playing tricks after being out in the cold so long. I set my pack down, took a swig of water, and looked again at the ice patch. It didn't crack or melt, but the surface shimmered slightly, like the light was bending weird, almost like it was a thin sheet of glass over something else. I took out my phone to snap a picture, but the screen flickered, dimmed, then went black. That's when I noticed the faint humming got louder for a moment, then stopped abruptly. I tried turning the phone back on, no luck. I fiddled with the flashlight app, which wouldn't turn on either. A slow, sinking feeling started settling in my gut. Something about this place was off, and I didn't like it. I grabbed my pack and started back the way I came, but the woods seemed different somehow, quieter, but also denser. The usual sounds of birds or squirrels were missing. Even the wind seemed muffled, like the forest was holding its breath. After maybe 10 minutes, I stopped to catch my breath and noticed the sun was dipping lower, even though I hadn't checked the time. My watch worked fine, so I pulled it out. Almost 2 hours had passed, but it felt like maybe 20 minutes since I'd been at the ice patch. That threw me off. I mean, time can drag or speed up when you're out in the wild alone, but this was different. I usually keep pretty tight track of my trip times. I shook my head and kept moving, trying not to let the weirdness creep in too deep. My phone still wouldn't turn on, and my GPS was acting funny, showing I was a few hundred feet off the trail, even though I hadn't strayed. Then I thought I heard footsteps behind me. Not animal, too heavy and slow to be a squirrel or bird. I stopped, heart pounding, and listened. Nothing. Maybe it was the wind shifting snow on branches, but I swear I felt eyes on me. I quickened my pace back toward the main trail, but the longer I walked, the more I felt like I was being watched. No sudden movements, no loud noises, just a presence I couldn't shake. When I finally broke through to the main trail, the forest seemed to relax. The sounds came back, the distant call of a raven, the scrape of wind through the spruces. My watch matched the time on my truck's dashboard, and my phone booted up once I got a signal near the road. I locked the truck doors, took a deep breath, and glanced back at the trees where that clearing was. The sky was fading to twilight, but I thought I saw a faint shimmer in the distance, like a light flickering deep in the woods. I drove home slow, eyes on the road, but my mind stuck on that circle of ice and the rows of needles. Something about it didn't make sense. How neat, how warm, how silent everything was. I keep thinking about the humming and how the time got all screwy and that feeling of being watched. I don't know what I stumbled onto that day, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't natural. Whatever it was there, and it noticed me, and I can't quite shake that. I was about 8 hours into my shift when I first noticed something odd. Name's Eli Harper, and I've been working as a miner around the Yukon Flats for the better part of a decade now. Mostly placer mining, but this particular contract had me down in an old lode mine that's been mostly forgotten. We're talking deep in the mountain, far from any roads or radio signals. Just me, the drill, and the narrow tunnels. It was late October, early dark, and the air outside had that sharp bite that hints winter's coming hard. I'd been working alone for a couple of days, pulling core samples and mapping veins when I spotted the first flicker. I was down a side shaft, crouched near a wall I was supposed to chip away for samples. I glanced up, and through a thin crack in the rock, maybe an inch wide, there was this faint glow. Not steady, more like little pulses of light, irregular, almost like a candle fighting a breeze, but colder, sharper. At first, I thought maybe it was some reflection from my headlamp bouncing off a patch of quartz or pyrite, but the light wasn't gold or white. It was this pale, bluish green, kind of eerie. Not something you see naturally in a mine, that's for sure. I leaned closer, trying not to disturb the rock around it. The crack was narrow, jagged, but the light flickered on and off. No pattern I could figure out. It wasn't a steady hum or a mechanical noise, just silence and the faint glow. Curiosity got the better of me. I moved my hand away from the drill and decided to follow it. The tunnel was tight, and I didn't want to cause a collapse, so I just eased forward, watching that crack in the wall. The further I got, the more cracks I noticed, all with the same irregular flickering glow. It was subtle, but definitely there. No heat from it either. In fact, that part of the tunnel felt colder than anything I'd been in before. I'm talking bone-chilling cold, like you step outside in January and the wind cuts through your jacket. That was the first thing that set me on edge. Mines usually hold some chill, sure, but this was different. The air felt heavier, and it tasted off. Not bad, just different. Almost like you could see it. I know it sounds crazy, but the air in that spot almost looked thicker, darker somehow. I tried calling out just to break the silence. Hello? Anybody there? My voice bounced back hollow. No response, just the soft crackle of the faint light flickering through the rocks. I kept following the glow. The tunnels twisted and turned, and the flickering wasn't always in the same spot. Sometimes it was closer to the ceiling, sometimes near the floor. I noticed that when I looked directly at the cracks, the light would dim or vanish, but when I looked away or from the corner of my eye, it'd pulse again. That was weird, like the light didn't want me staring at it. I shook it off at first, thinking maybe I was just tired or spooked from working alone in the dark. But then the temperature dropped even more, like someone opened a freezer door nearby. My breath started fogging in the beam of my headlamp, and I had to zip my jacket tighter. I checked my watch. No sudden weather changes outside that I knew of. The mine was deep, insulated from surface temps. I started feeling a creeping kind of dread, but not the kind you get from danger or fear. More like confusion mixed with this weird, empty feeling. The light wasn't threatening, but it felt like it didn't belong. I paused near a cluster of these cracks, and the glow vanished entirely. Not just flickered out, it was like someone switched it off. I waited, heart thumping louder, scanning every inch with my lamp. Nothing. Then, the cold really hit. The kind that sinks into your bones, colder than anything I'd felt underground before. My fingers stiffened on the drill handle. I reached for my radio and clicked the button. Static. Dead air. I tried again. Nothing. Normally, I get a signal deep here, bouncing off some relay or whatever, but this time the radio was silent. No crackles, no voices. That's when I noticed the silence around me. No dripping water, no distant echoes of rock settling, no wind pushing through cracks. Just a dead stillness. It was so quiet, it felt like the tunnel itself was holding its breath. I glanced back toward where I'd come, ready to turn around and head back, but the path looked different. The shadows shifted oddly, and the rock faces seemed smoother, almost unnatural. I shook my head. "Get a grip, Eli," I muttered. The light flickered again, but this time on a crack just a few feet ahead. I took a slow step forward, then another. The glow pulsed, irregular, dimming when I stared at it, coming back when I looked sideways. I reached out, finger nearly touching the cool stone where the crack was. That's when the air shifted. The cold deepened, and suddenly the tunnel felt smaller, tighter, like something invisible was pressing in. I backed off, breathing heavier. My headlamp caught a faint outline beyond the cracks, nothing solid, more like a shadow shifting in and out of the corner of my eye. I spun toward the main tunnel entrance, ready to get out. But the path looked different again. I swear the walls had shifted. The angles weren't the same. It was like I'd walked into a place that didn't line up with the mind map or reality. I started retracing my steps fast, but the further I went, the colder and quieter it got. The last thing I remember before finally breaking out of the tunnels was a low humming sound. Not mechanical, not animal, just a constant vibration that you feel more than hear. I pushed through the entrance and was hit by the fresh air, the cold of the evening, but this time normal like it should be. I sat down on a rock outside the mine, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. Back at camp, I told the foreman what happened. He just nodded and said some old mines have their quirks. Maybe a pocket of cold air or unusual minerals. But I knew that wasn't it. I went back the next day with the other guy from camp to check the tunnels, but the cracks with the flickering light were gone. The walls looked solid, no gaps, no sign anything was there at all. The temperature inside was back to normal, the radio worked fine, and the silence was just regular mine silence. That was weeks ago. Since then, I've checked every day, tried to find that place again. No luck. Sometimes at night, I catch myself staring at the rocks, waiting for that faint blue-green flicker to show up. The cold part I can still feel in my bones. I don't know what I saw, or if it was even there, but I know the mine's deeper than we thought, and sometimes the earth holds onto things we don't understand. I was driving north on Route 14 through southern Illinois, somewhere between McLeansboro and Wayne City. It was early September, and the sun had just dipped below the tree line. That kind of time where the sky's still lit up, but everything else is already shadowed. I'd left my aunt's place late and figured I'd just make it home before midnight if I didn't stop too long. That stretch of 14 is pretty empty, just cornfields, silos, and the occasional cluster of trees or rundown barn. I had music playing low and my windows cracked. It was still warm enough that the breeze felt good, and there were crickets starting up in the ditches. A little past 7:30, I noticed some lights off to the left, maybe half a mile into a field. At first I figured it was farm equipment. Those big harvesters have lights all over, but these weren't moving, and they were high up. 5 lights, maybe 6, in a kind of shallow arc, all glowing that pale yellow white, not quite as harsh as headlights. They just hovered there, totally still. No blinking, no sound, and too spread out to be anything attached to a single vehicle. I slowed down a bit, trying to get a better angle, but the hedgerows and corn were too high. I thought about pulling over, but there wasn't a shoulder, just gravel and drainage. Then, as I rounded a slight bend, the trees blocked the field entirely. When I came out the other side, maybe 30 seconds later, the lights were gone. It bugged me. I kept looking in the mirrors, expecting to see them again. At one point, I even thought I saw them reappear way back behind me, but it was faint, and I couldn't tell if it was just a reflection on the glass. I told myself it was probably a drone display or something, some ag-tech thing I didn't understand. But the road stayed empty, and the longer I drove, the more that moment stuck with me. It didn't feel like something explainable. That's the best I can say. About 2 hours later, I pulled into a little gas station near Yucca. I'd been needing to pee for the last 40 miles and figured I'd grab something to drink too. It was one of those older stations, just 2 pumps out front and a small shop with flickering fluorescent lights. No other cars were there when I pulled in, but there was a black SUV parked off to the side, the engine off, windows up. Looked newer, out of place for the area. I went inside, used the bathroom, bought a bottle of water and a snack. When I came back out, the SUV was still there. I didn't think much of it until I got in my car, started the engine, and rolled down the window a bit to cool things off. That's when a man walked up. I didn't hear him approach. He just leaned forward out of the dark and rested his hand lightly on the window frame, which startled the hell out of me. He was wearing a black suit, not a cheap one. This looked fitted. Black tie, white shirt, sunglasses, even though it was full dark by then. He wasn't smiling, not angry, just expressionless. "You didn't see anything unusual on Route 14, did you?" he asked. His voice was soft but clipped, no accent I could place, almost robotic in tone. He didn't look in the window so much as through it, like he was studying something behind me. I just stared at him for a second. Then I said, "No?" He didn't respond right away, just kept his hand there, watching me. Then he nodded once, let go of the car, and walked back toward the SUV. He didn't get in, though. He just stood next to the driver's side door, facing away from me. I backed out a little faster than usual and pulled out onto the road. My hands were sweating. I don't know why, exactly. He hadn't threatened me, hadn't said anything that weird on paper. But something about him felt wrong. Off in a way I couldn't name. A mile down the road, I checked my mirror. The SUV was behind me, maybe 2 car lengths back. No headlights, just a black shape moving in the dark. It stayed behind me for about 15 miles, never gaining, never falling back. I tried switching lanes, slowing down, speeding up a bit. It mirrored everything. It wasn't tailgating, but it was there, like it was tethered to me. Finally, I turned off onto a smaller county road, one that curved back toward the highway through a bunch of farmland. No real reason, just a hunch. I watched in the mirror. Sure enough, the SUV followed. I took another random turn, this one onto a gravel lane. No streetlight, barely wide enough for 2 cars. There were no houses visible, just open dark fields. When I looked back again, the SUV was gone. I pulled over and killed my lights, engine still running, waited, listened, nothing. I stayed there for maybe 3 minutes. No other cars came. No sound but insects in the wind in the stalks. When I finally pulled back onto the road and started heading home again, I didn't see the SUV for the rest of the drive. But the weird part is what happened the next morning. When I went out to my car, there were fingerprints on the driver's side window. Smudges where the man had leaned in, sure, but also higher up on the frame above the window, almost like someone had been gripping it from the top. And there was a mark, thin and straight, running from the edge of the roof down to the door handle. It wasn't a scratch. It looked like some kind of residue, slightly oily, faintly iridescent in the sun. I tried wiping it off with a towel, but it left a stain, like it had sunk into the paint. I had the car washed later that day. The streak stayed. I never saw the SUV again. But a few nights after that, I was walking the dog just before bed and noticed a black sedan parked across the street from my house. No one inside. No lights on. It wasn't one of the neighbors' cars. When I looked again, 5 minutes later, it was gone. Could be unrelated? I don't know. But I've started avoiding Route 14. Not because of the lights, exactly. It's the question. The way he asked it. Like he already knew the answer. I came around a bend on the Weatherford Trail just as the mist was lifting off the pines, and there it was. Black sedan, engine ticking hot, tires sunk an inch into the dirt. I'd started hiking before sunrise, hoping to reach Shelter Rock by noon, but this was neither rental nor local rig. No plates, no decals, just a sleek, unmarked car parked sideways across the single track, doors closed tight, windows dark. I stopped maybe 20 feet out, swallowed a mouthful of water, and tried to make sense of it. No footprints beyond mine, no keys on the hood, nothing obvious pointing to its owner. The engine was still warm enough that heat wisped off the metal like breath. I wasn't sure whether to check inside or hike on, but I needed to pee, and the focus of my mind shifted violently. What if someone was still in there? Hurt or trapped? I edged forward, boots sinking in the soft earth, and peered in through the passenger window. No one in the front seat. No purse, no backpack, no phone. The glove box was closed, the center console latched. I knocked on the glass once, softly, then harder. Still no answer. I tried the door handle. It clicked, but didn't open like it was locked. I crouched and shined my flashlight into the back seat. There was a single duffel bag, military green, nylon, zipped shut. I flicked on the flashlight beam, saw nothing else. No sign of blood or struggle. Just that bag, resting like it had been set down moments before. My heart thumped. Part of me wanted to leave, to pretend I hadn't seen it, but I felt responsible. I set my pack down, fumbled for my phone to call the ranger station at Cold Spring Camp, but there was no reception. I tried again. Nothing. So I snapped photos of the license plate area, just blank metal, and went around to the driver's side. Same story. Locked, empty, engine warm. Light filtered stronger now, sun breaching the ridge. I unzipped the duffel bag. Inside were 3 rolled black shirts, a pair of dark socks, and a thin envelope stamped "Not for public release." The envelope was sealed. I turned it over, looked at the flap. No name, no date. I shoved it back in, zipped the bag, and closed it. Then I left the bag on the roof and jogged back to my pack. I debated, should I carry the bag down for help? But it was heavy and awkward. I didn't know what was in that envelope, and I didn't want to be responsible if it contained something dangerous. I tucked my phone into airplane mode, just in case, and decided I'd hike to the next junction, about 3 miles down, where there was a spot that sometimes got a signal. If I got through, I'd call it in. On the way down, I felt eyes on me. Not a person visible, just that prickly sense you get when you're being watched. I stopped twice, spun in a circle, only trees, only rocks, only the shifting shadows. At the junction, I stopped at the big granite outcrop where hikers carved names. I waited a minute, then tried my phone. 1 bar. I dialed park headquarters, rang twice, then clicked to voicemail. "This is Ranger Salazar. If this is urgent, press 1. I pressed 1. Ring. Ring. Then a click and static. I told them who I was, where I'd found the car, that the engine was warm, there was an envelope marked "not for public release." I said, "Please send someone. Thank you." Click. I hit end before the beep. I sat on a boulder, ate a granola bar, and watched fog swirl through the pines. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number that just said, "Turn back." I stared at it, thumb hovering over call back, but there was no voicemail, no ID. I deleted it. I waited another 20 minutes, but no park vehicle came through. I pocketed the phone and started back up the trail toward the car. My stomach was in knots. I felt like I'd walked into the middle of something not meant for me. When I reached the clearing, the car was gone. No tire tracks, no skid marks, just the disturbed ground where it had sat and that duffel bag on the dirt. I picked up the bag, light now, nothing rattling inside, and headed down before I changed my mind. By late afternoon, I'd made it to Cold Spring Camp. The ranger station was a weathered A-frame cabin with 2 windows and a sliding door. I knocked and let myself in. The ranger on duty, a woman named Perkins, sat behind a battered desk sorting maps. I introduced myself, gave my name and permit number, explained the car, the envelope, the messages. Ranger Perkins frowned and reached for a logbook. She flipped pages slowly, squinted, then said, "No one called about interference today." Her voice was neutral, like she did this all the time. I pointed at the envelope description. She tapped a finger on the desk. "We've had reports of trail cams glitching near the ridge, weird electrical interference, but nothing about cars." I asked if interference meant anything. She hesitated and said, "It's radio jamming. GPS, cell, drone controls. Happens sometimes near the towers." I told her the car was gone. She said she'd send someone in the morning to look. I gave her the duffel bag and she put it in a locker behind the desk. I stayed the night in a camper cabin they rented out, just a cot and a propane heater. At dusk, I walked to the picnic tables to watch the ridge. The towers loomed, blinking red lights. I sat and drank instant coffee, but my mind kept drifting back to that car, those shirts, and the envelope label. What wasn't for public release? Around 9 p.m., the door rattled. I wasn't expecting anyone. I cracked it open and saw 2 men in black suits standing just outside the porch light. No badges, no hats, nothing to connect them to park services. They looked ordinary except for their clothes, new, perfectly pressed against the chill. I stepped back as they approached. The taller one said, "Evening." His voice was polite but distant. The shorter one said, "We'd like to ask about anyone reporting interference." I pointed toward the station cabin. "Ranger Perkins just took a duffel bag. She said something about GPS jamming." They nodded, as if they'd heard that already. Then the tall one asked, "Did you notice anything else unusual? Lights? Sounds? Anything off the trail?" I thought about the warm engine, the envelope, the phantom message on my phone. I told them the car was gone when I returned, but its engine was still warm when I found it. The shorter one lifted a hand, palm out, and said, "Thank you. That will be all." No smile, no follow-up. I waited to see if they'd say more, but they just stood, back straight, hands by their sides. Then they turned and walked down the path toward the station, straight into the dark without flashlights. I watched until they disappeared. The night was still, only crickets and pine needles drifting in the breeze. I locked the cabin door and pulled the covers over my shoulder. In the morning, the duffel bag was gone from the locker. Ranger Perkins claimed never to have seen it. The logbook still showed no report of interference. The trail crew found no sign of the car. The GPS logs on my phone didn't record the coordinates. I checked them myself. I hiked out that day, skipping Shelter Rock entirely. I left the trail early, took the main road back to town. I went home, put a new lock on my backpack, and tossed the photo of the envelope into the trash. Sometimes I drive past that logging road and glance up at the Tower Ridge. No traffic, no parked cars, no men in black, just quiet forest and the distant hum of the town below. But once in a while my phone buzzes with a message from an unknown number, and I don't open it. I heard the door chime at exactly 11:02 p.m., but when I looked up from the counter, I saw no one walking in, just the empty double doors and the dull hum of the neon open sign. I glanced at the clock behind me, 11:02, and then back out the front window. A black sedan sat under the lone street lamp, headlights off, engine idling so quietly I barely heard it over the air conditioner. I was 7 hours into my night shift at Green's 24-hour mini-mart, and I'd never seen that car before. I folded my arms and pretended not to notice. The clerk before me said, "Can I help you?" But he was wrong place, wrong time. The sedan stayed there, broad at the shoulders and low to the ground, like someone had rubbed polish over the entire body. In overnights, you get ghosts, drunk drivers, college kids looking for snacks, but almost never someone who just sits there for hours. By midnight, I'd rung up exactly 12 customers, a mix of kids buying Red Bulls and one guy buying dog biscuits at 3 a.m., and the sedan never moved. I counted how many cigarettes I'd sold. 35. I refilled the snack rack and gazed out the window. No lights moved in the lot except for the single filament bulb overhead, ticking like a slow clock. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Even Scout, the store cat, hunkered down behind the chips aisle, tail wrapped around her paws. At 1:17, my soda cooler buzzed and flickered off for 2 seconds. The power surge was small, enough that my fluorescent lights dimmed, but the coffee machine kept running. That convinced me it wasn't the whole block, just the store's wiring. I muttered to myself and went to reset the breaker in the back room. When I opened the fuse box, the breaker for aisle 3 had tripped. I flipped it back and watched the lights return. Back at the counter, I considered calling my manager, but figured I'd mention it tomorrow. At 2:45, a drip started in the ceiling by the back door. Water, cold and clear, landing in a small puddle on the concrete floor. I grabbed a mop and bucket, found the leak right under the air duct. I inspected the duct. No condensation, no dropped pipe. The drip slowed after 5 minutes, then stopped. I emptied the bucket outside. The lot was empty, the sedan gone. I figured maybe the driver stopped nodding off. The air smelled musty now, like wet carpet. I circled back inside. Scout rushed out from under the counter, rubbing my leg. The drip hadn't woken anyone. I checked the restrooms, dry. I shrugged and grabbed a coffee. By 3:30, the store was quiet again. The bug zapper over the door sizzled twice. A chill cut through the store even though the AC was set on cool. I shivered and pulled my hoodie tighter. That's when I noticed the sedan rolling forward 3 feet. No driver's silhouette in the window. The passenger door opened, but no one stepped out. The door closed on its own and the car rolled back, unchanged, as if on invisible tracks. That was enough. I walked to the front doors, aimed my flashlight at the vehicle. No one inside. No movement. The engine was off now, and the thick tires blocked any sound of it starting again. I went back to the counter, rubbed my eyes, and stared at the security monitors. None of the cameras covered the parking lot well. The angle missed the driver's seat. I hit the view back lot button, tried to pan the camera, but the feed cut to static, then returned to normal after 4 seconds. The only thing frozen in pixelated gray was the front of the black sedan. I stared at the screen until the static cleared. The car remained unchanged. I pressed the record button. The feed continued, no glitches. By 4:50, I'd had one more customer, a young woman buying trail mix. She stared at me, then at the lot, and said, "Is something out there?" I said no, just an old car. She nodded and left. When the doors closed, I checked again. The sedan's roof was empty. I clocked over to the break room at 5:30 and opened the refrigerator. My sandwich was gone. I'd left turkey and cheese, but someone else had taken it. No note, no wrapper in the wastebasket. Just empty plastic. I thought maybe the night janitor had come in early, but I hadn't heard anyone. My shift ended at 6 a.m. The sky was already staining gray. I counted down the minutes, ringing up 2 more people who paid cash for lottery tickets and beef jerky. At 6:02, I hit the button to open the doors. The chime sounded, and I grabbed my jacket. I walked out to the lot, expecting the sedan to still sit there, mocking me. But the lot was empty. No car, no footprints in the gravel, no oil spots. I checked the side door exit. It was locked and no one had tried to pry it. My phone buzzed. A text from the manager saying, "Leave the key under the mat tonight. Maintenance at 10." I hadn't told her the fridge thing, hadn't mentioned the car, nothing. I answered, "Got it." I walked to my car, keys in hand, and stopped. A black SUV sat idling in front of the convenience store across the road. A man in a black suit sat in the driver's seat, jacket buttoned, tie narrow, hands flat on the wheel. He stared at me without blinking. My pulse spiked. I raised a hand in greeting. He opened his door and stepped onto the street without a sound. I walked closer, keeping my jacket zipped. The morning was cool under my breath. He said, "You won't remember this conversation." His voice was low but clear. He reached into his jacket pocket and pressed a small card into my palm. I saw the edges, white, blank, and in the corner a single line of type, "Do not recall." I blinked. He stepped back, got into the SUV, and drove away without headlights, tires rolling silent on asphalt. I stood there holding the card. When I looked down, the text was gone. My hand was empty. I glanced across the road. The store's doors were closed, lights still on inside. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove away without looking back. I took off from Pine Valley Airstrip just after 5 in the afternoon, the sun still high and hot over southern Oregon. I'm an amateur pilot, just me and a Cessna 172 rented from the local flying club. My plan was to circle over the Rogue River Canyon, catch some landscape photography, then head back before sunset. No big deal. As I climbed to 3,500 feet, the wind kicked up from the west. The radio crackled with chatter about a small brush fire near Dry Creek Road. They said the fire crews had it contained, but the smoke plume was visible 50 miles away. I figured I'd swing past just for a look. The corridor over the canyon was clear, so I banked east and pointed the plane toward the haze rising in the distance. By 5:25, I was over the fire. Below me, the ground was a patchwork of red-orange flames and blackened earth. The heat rose against the belly of the plane, no turbulence, but a subtle shudder, like driving over a rough spot at high speed. I dialed my camera for a closer shot when something caught my eye above the smoke. 6 glowing orbs, silent and still, hovered maybe 100 feet above the tree line. They were pale, almost white at first glance, but when I zoomed in, they had a soft amber core surrounded by a thin halo. They formed a loose V shape, each orb spaced about 30 feet from its neighbor, moving as one with the breeze. No prop wash, no flicker of strobe, just gentle drift. I blinked and reached to steady the camera. The orbs didn't blink, didn't make a sound. The radio chatter in the background sounded distant. Even the engine noise felt muted. I rolled the window down a crack and strained to listen. Nothing but the hum of the propeller and the rush of wind. I thought about calling flight service to report a possible drone or hot air lanterns, but something held me back. I watched for maybe 2 minutes until the orbs drifted apart, one on each side, like they were dispersing into the woods. I snapped a few more shots, then banked north to climb out of the thermal updraft. By 5:40, I was clear of the smoke and headed back to Pine Valley. My camera's memory card filled with photos of fire lines and burned pines, and a handful of grainy shots of those orbs. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was probably some kind of containment balloon experiment. Something the fire district set loose to monitor air currents. I radioed the tower and got clearance to land on runway 21. The strip was empty except for a fuel truck idling near the hangar. I taxied in, cut the engine, and stepped out into the cool late afternoon air. 2 mechanics waved, but I gave them a quick nod and headed for the pilot's lounge to download my photos. That's when he appeared. He was tall and lean, wearing a black suit that didn't quite match the dusty tarmac. No pilot's wings, no name tag, just dark glasses and a slim black tie. He approached me with a measured stride, hands clasped behind his back. I thought maybe he was one of the fire district officials. He held out his hand. "Captain Lewis?" he said, voice smooth. I shook his hand only because he seemed polite. His grip was firm, dry. I said, "Yeah, that's me. Richard Lewis, you with the fire department?" He shook his head. "Just a concerned observer. You saw those orbs over Dry Creek, correct?" My stomach nodded. "Yeah. I was circling the fire, got some shots." He nodded slowly. "You've seen too much. I'd appreciate if you file that sighting as a weather balloon release. The county does occasional upper air launches near Prospect. Wind data." He pronounced Prospect as if it were a code word. I frowned. Weather balloons? At night? And 6 of them drifting low over a forest fire? He smiled, just a flicker at the corner of his mouth. Routine. No need to report anything unusual. He handed me a plain white card stamped with the airstrip logo and phone number. "Call this line tomorrow and say balloon release confirmed. They'll know what you mean." I pocketed the card. He turned and walked away, posture straight, as if someone had just pressed play on a music box. No goodbye, no hesitation. I watched him get into a black SUV parked next to the hangar. The engine didn't roar, just a low growl, and the vehicle melted into the parking lot's shade until it was gone. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty asphalt. Then I walked into the lounge and checked the photos. The orbs were there in every frame, soft, perching above the smoke, then gone in the next shots. I downloaded them onto a flash drive and plugged in my camera for charging. My hands were shaking enough that I spilled coffee into the gutter. When I called the number the next morning, just as he said, I got a generic recording. "Weather balloon release confirmed at 5:20 p.m. Thank you. Over and out." No name, no follow-up questions. I haven't mentioned it to any friends at the club. No one I know flies near that fire district after dark. Every time I look at the photos, I see those 6 amber circles glowing in the gloom, perfectly still, and I wonder what they were tracking. I keep the flash drive hidden in my console. I tell myself they're weather balloons. If I say it enough, I might believe it. I got to Lake Ogallala around 4:45 that morning. It was late May, still cold enough to see your breath, but calm, real still. No wind, not even bird chatter yet. Just that kind of quiet you only get when you're the first person awake for miles. I parked in the little gravel pull-off near the west end of the lake, where the trees thin out and there's that old wood bench down by the shore. Nobody else was there, no other cars. I was hoping for trout. I had my thermos, tackle, the whole setup. Just planned to sit for a few hours and fish until the sun got high. Didn't even make it to my first cast. I'd barely walked halfway down to the water when I noticed something up in the sky that didn't look right. At first I figured it was just one of those low fog banks you get around the lake when it's cold. It looked like a flat-bottomed cloud, not big, maybe the size of a barn from where I stood. Pale gray, kind of wispy around the edges. It was hovering maybe a couple 100 feet above the far side of the lake, out near the bend where the trees curve in. I didn't think much of it at first. I set my stuff down and poured some coffee, but I kept glancing at it because it wasn't drifting. Clouds move, even on still mornings, but this thing just stayed put. Dead center above the water. Didn't even wobble. Then I noticed it was turning, slowly, like a lazy rotation, counterclockwise. You wouldn't catch it unless you stared for a good 30 seconds. That's how slow it was. But it was definitely rotating. That's when I started getting a weird feeling. Not scared exactly, but my stomach went cold. Something about it didn't sit right. I pulled out my little handheld radio, the weather band kind, and flipped it on just to hear something. It buzzed to life, static and bits of a forecast coming through. Then this low sound came underneath the voice, like a subwoofer hum. Barely audible, but low enough I felt it in my ribs. I thought it was feedback or a glitch in the signal. I switched channels. The hum followed. Changed frequencies again. Same thing. Always under the static like it was coming from outside the radio. Just this steady, vibrating tone that seemed to rise and fall real slow, like breathing. I looked back at the lake. The surface, which had been lightly rippling, was glass now. Not a single ring, not even from bugs. Then I realized no fish were surfacing. Not one. That part really messed with me, because even on the slowest mornings, you see something. A little splash, a circle here or there, but this, nothing. Like the lake had gone to sleep. That hum kept going, not louder, just deeper. I don't know how else to describe it. It made my molars feel itchy. I stood there holding my coffee and radio, not moving. I couldn't even bring myself to unzip the tackle bag. I just stared across the water at this rotating, hovering thing and listened to that low tone shake through the trees. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe 10. Long enough for the sun to peek over the ridge behind me and catch the edge of that thing in the sky. When the sunlight hit it, it didn't light up like a cloud. It didn't even change color. It just sort of shimmered like heat off asphalt and then gone. Not like it zipped away, just blinked out. 1 second it was there, slowly turning, and the next it wasn't. Like someone flipped off a projector. The hum stopped at the same time, just cut out. My radio clicked back to normal static and the tail end of some weather report. I looked down at the lake again, and a second later, plop, fish surfaced. Little circles started rippling out all over. I don't know what I saw. I didn't fish that morning. I poured out my coffee, zipped everything back up, and walked straight back to the truck. I didn't even tell anyone until about a year later. I just stopped going to that part of the lake.